Hi guys. Tonight we step into the brittle silence of a medieval winter morning, inside a hut made almost entirely of rough-hewn timber. The kind of place where the walls creak as if they're alive, and every gust of wind outside feels like it's searching for cracks to slip through. You're lying beneath a thin patchwork blanket, your body pressed close to the warmth of others, and yet you can still see your own breath drifting like smoke in the faint glow of embers. The roof beams are beaded with frost, delicate crystals glistening above you like an icy constellation, and you have the sudden thought, you probably wouldn't survive this if you had to do it for real. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, if you're listening right now, leave a comment with your location and the time of night, because there's something strangely cozy about knowing where in the world everyone else is lying awake. Now, dim the lights, and let's slip deeper into the story. The hut you wake in is a world apart from our modern comforts. Think of walls made of split logs, their gaps smeared with clay or dung to keep out drafts, yet never perfectly sealed. A thatched roof sags slightly under snow, each stalk of straw rigid with ice. Beneath you lies a crude floor of packed earth, scattered with straw meant to soften it, though it is damp in places where melted snow seeped through. The air is dense, still, and carries that faint, acrid perfume of smoke that never truly leaves, no matter how often the fire is stoked. You stir, half buried under the heap of bodies that passed for bedding. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval families often slept all together. Parents, children, even servants, pressed shoulder to shoulder, simply to conserve heat. It wasn't just affection, it was physics. You feel the weight of a younger sibling curled against your legs, the warmth of your mother's back at your side, and above you, the scrape of your father's cough rattling through the rafters. Even so, the night has not been easy. You remember the sharp pang of cold waking you again and again, the way frost crept across your toes despite layers of wool. You're grateful for the blanket, but it's more of a quilt of memories than an effective insulator, scraps of old cloth stitched by careful hands. Heavy but not entirely warm. You tuck it tighter under your chin, chasing whatever warmth is left. There is something uncanny about these mornings, when night hasn't quite gone and day hasn't yet begun. The glow of embers paints the ceiling red in patches, like smudged stains. Outside, a rooster crows into the darkness, far too early, its cry muffled by snow. Inside, every sound echoes the creak of timber beams expanding and contracting, the whisper of breath, the occasional scuttle of a mouse bold enough to search for crumbs. Historians still argue whether frost was truly as constant inside these huts as we imagine, or whether steady fires kept the cold more at bay than romanticized accounts suggest. Some scholars claim that surviving embers kept huts tolerably warm, while others believe that waking to see your breath fog the room was an unavoidable truth of winter life. You, of course, don't have the luxury of debating. The shiver running through you proves the cold is very real. A quirky tidbit drifts through your thoughts. In some households, people rubbed fat or grease onto their faces before bed, hoping it would act like a primitive moisturizer and guard against the sting of frost. You can almost smell it, mingled with the hay and the earthy scent of animals that sometimes shared your hut. The idea makes you grimace, but then again, anything to keep skin from cracking open in bitter air might have seemed worth the effort. The door, little more than a plank propped into place, rattles under another gust. You think of wolves always somewhere out there, in stories if not just beyond the edge of the clearing. The thought brings a nervous flutter to your stomach. Yet for now, the danger feels far away, muffled by snowdrifts, silenced by the cold. What's closer is the scrape of your father rising, stirring coals with a stick, muttering under his breath as he tries to coax flame from faint glow. A hiss, a spark, the smell of wood smoke beginning to bloom again. Relief spreads through the room, though no one stirs except you. The medieval day begins in darkness and in silence, and you realize the night has not so much ended as blurred into another phase of endurance. For sleep was never quite seamless. It broke often, stretched long, woven with dreams and discomforts. You blink, watching frost tremble on the rafters, hearing the fire catch, feeling your mother shift slightly closer to the warmth. This is where your day begins. Not with an alarm, not with the hum of a heater, but with the ache of cold, the fragile glow of embers, and the slow awareness that you survived another night in a wooden hut against the brutal winter. And though you want nothing more than to burrow deeper into warmth, the creak of timbers reminds you, morning has come, and survival demands rising. You lie there, reluctant to move, feeling the stiffness in your limbs from the cold. The air in the hut is so sharp that it nips at your nose and cheeks, and when you pull the patchwork cover higher, the warmth is fleeting, like trying to trap smoke in your hands. A low groan comes from the corner of the room where another body shifts on the straw, and the sound reminds you that you are never truly alone in this space. Privacy, in this world, doesn't exist. In fact, the very concept would seem absurd, because survival demands togetherness. Families clustered on straw pallets were not merely a matter of comfort, they were living insulation. A mainstream historical fact tells us that beds as we know them today, with frames, mattresses and bedding, were luxuries reserved for lords and wealthy households. For common folk, sleep was simpler and far harsher. Imagine a single heap of straw laid out on the packed earth, flattened and prickly, with hides, wool, or whatever cloth could be spared layered over it. Whole families gathered there, limbs tangling, backs pressed to bellies, faces hidden under the same worn blanket. This closeness wasn't optional. It was the difference between surviving the winter night and shivering to exhaustion. You sense the weight of that closeness now. Your younger brother, small and restless, is wedged at your side. His feet, cold as stones, push against your legs, seeking warmth. Beyond him, your sister curls up tight like a hedgehog, her hair a tangle against your arm. Your mother, at the center, holds the smallest child, a toddler still at the age when sleep comes easily no matter the cold. And on the far edge, your father stretches his long legs, trying to shield everyone from drafts creeping through the gaps in the wall. A quirky tidbit whispers into the scene. Sometimes, straw pallets were not just for humans. In the smallest huts, animals might share the bedding space too, particularly young goats or lambs. Their warmth was precious, and while the smell might not have been pleasant, the comfort of another living body outweighed the inconvenience. It was a rustic form of heating alive, breathing, and loud. You imagine a goat bleating softly in the night, or a hen flapping near your feet, both companions and necessities in this struggle against the cold. Historians still debate whether these communal sleeping arrangements fostered stronger family bonds or if they led to frustrations that quietly simmered through the long winters. Some argue that the intimacy created resilience and a sense of shared hardship, while others suggest that tensions must have run high when everyone, from infants to elders, was pressed together night after night with no escape. You can imagine both being true. The comfort of knowing you were never alone was a balm, yet at times, the press of bodies must have felt suffocating. The sensations of such a night are etched into your body. The itch of straw pricking through thin cloth, the heaviness of a sibling's elbow pressing against your ribs, the musky odor of wool blankets unwashed for months, and above all, the shared rhythm of breath. The hut itself becomes an organism, every person within contributing heat, sound, and scent to its atmosphere. You fall asleep and wake again, not as an individual, but as a small piece of a huddled whole. As dawn pushes faint light through cracks in the wooden slats, the sight is almost comical. Limbs sprawled across each other, mouths agape, hair stuck in wild tufts, children drooling onto sleeves, parents muttering half-dream words. The hut is less a bedroom and more a communal nest, improvised but necessary. You shift slightly, brushing straw aside, and realize how much of medieval life revolved around these simple accommodations. The floor beneath the pallet is uneven, packed earth that grows damp when snow melts near the door. To combat the damp, families sometimes added layers of reeds or dry leaves beneath the straw. Yet no matter how carefully arranged, by the end of winter the bed was flattened, filthy, and swarming with tiny intruders. Lice, fleas, and mites were a constant presence, and many households accepted them as inevitable companions. You scratch at your neck, half in memory and half in irritation, because you know that rest was never free of such interruptions. Still, the warmth of human company outweighs the discomfort. Imagine trying to sleep alone in that hut, the cold pressing down, the silence oppressive, the fear of wolves or spirits heightened. With your family, each breath reassures you that life continues, that you are part of something resilient. It is a lesson in survival that modern sleepers, tucked away in private rooms, may find difficult to grasp. Closeness was not an inconvenience, it was the lifeline. A curious comparison arises when you think about noble households. While peasants shared a single pallet, wealthier families often had large wooden beds with heavy curtains. These curtains were not mere decoration, they served as insulation, trapping body heat inside a small cocoon. Yet, in a way, your straw pallet achieves a similar effect through numbers. What lords accomplished with fabric, peasants accomplished with flesh and breath. There is also the element of safety. Lying together means no one is left vulnerable at the edge of the hut. If a draught seeps in, if a noise outside jolts you awake, if a child cries, the family responds together. You're never truly defenseless when you are part of the heap. And though your body aches from the lack of space, you know deep down that you would not trade it for solitude. Even dreams seem shared in this environment. One sibling mutters in sleep, another kicks at imaginary threats, and you half dream of the same wolves or raiders, as if fears seep into the entire cluster of sleepers. Perhaps this is why folklore and superstition flourished, because collective experience blurred the lines between reality and dream. Your father stirs again, rising to feed the fire. His movement rouses the others, and slowly the nest of bodies begins to untangle. Children rub their eyes, mothers hush babies, and the hut fills with the low murmur of voices. Morning is never quiet, because survival demands activity. Already, the straw pallet seems less like a bed and more like a reminder. It is time to rise, to fetch wood, to face another day. You roll over, reluctant to leave the warmth of the group. The cold outside that blanket is so immediate, so biting that you hesitate. Yet the rhythm of life allows no delay. You smile faintly, knowing that tonight and tomorrow, and through many nights still to come, you will return to this same place, this same cluster of bodies, this same fragile warmth in the heart of winter's brutality. You stretch your legs beneath the covers, trying to rub warmth back into your toes. Even with bodies huddled together on straw, the cold lingers like a guest that refuses to leave. The blanket slips from your shoulders, and you hastily pull it back up, feeling the coarse patches scrape across your skin. In this dim firelight, you notice something you never pay attention to in summer: the layers of clothing you wear even in sleep. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval people rarely undressed for bed the way modern sleepers do. Night clothes, as we understand them, were not common outside of wealthier households. Instead, peasants simply slept in their day garments, or in whatever spare tunics and cloaks they could pile on. The goal wasn't comfort, it was survival. You glance down at yourself now, bundled in a rough wool tunic, a faded linen shift underneath, and a patched cloak thrown across your shoulders. Your legs are wrapped in thick hose, the wool itchy but blessedly warm, and at your feet a pair of cloth wrappings serve as makeshift socks. The sensation is familiar: the constant itch of wool, the heaviness of damp fabric, the way layers twist uncomfortably during the night. And yet, without them, the cold would have gnawed at your skin more fiercely. You remember your mother's words, muttered each evening as she urged you to add another layer: better the itch than the chill. A quirky tidbit emerges from memory. Some peasants stuffed straw or scraps of fabric into their clothes as extra insulation. Imagine tucking handfuls of dry grass into the gaps of your tunic, turning your own body into a scarecrow of sorts, but one shielded against the night air. In desperate winters, Even that seemed like a clever trick, and you can almost hear the rustle of straw with every movement. Historians still argue whether this practice of layering was universal, or if it was more common in northern regions where winters were harsher. Some accounts suggest southern peasants, in milder climates, may have shed layers for comfort. Others insist that across Europe, the fear of cold outweighed any desire for lightness in sleep. You suspect the truth, as always, lies somewhere in between, habits shaped by geography, by poverty, by necessity. You look around your family now, noting how each person is wrapped in their own peculiar fashion. Your father wears the same cloak he uses for work in the fields, its hem frayed, its wool stiff with use. Your mother has layered 2 linen shifts beneath a heavy overdress, and she pulls a faded scarf over her hair, the ends tucked under her chin to keep her face warm. Your sister clutches a fur so tattered it barely counts as fur anymore, yet it shields her hands as she tucks them close to her chest. The smell of these garments is hard to ignore, a mix of smoke, sweat, and damp wool. Washing clothes in winter is rare, water is frozen, streams are dangerous, and drying fabric in the cold is nearly impossible. Instead, the garments carry the memory of every day's labor, every hearth fire, every night's sleep. They are less clothing and more companions in survival, worn thin but stubbornly protective. You shift on the straw, adjusting your cloak around your shoulders, and think of those rare luxuries you've heard of. Lords in their castles with fur-lined robes, merchants with feather-stuffed mattresses and linen nightshirts. Such stories feel more like legends than reality. For you, sleep is always wrapped in the scratch of wool, the weight of patched cloth, the shared warmth of garments passed down from elder to child. And yet, there is something comforting in the ritual of dressing for bed. Each evening, as the fire dies low, your family prepares for sleep not by shedding clothes, but by adding them. Scarves wound tighter, cloaks pulled closer, woolen caps tugged over ears. The act itself becomes a signal. The world is cold, but together, wrapped and layered, you will endure. The air in the hut prickles against your skin as your father opens the door for a moment to check the snow. A blast of icy wind sweeps through, and you shiver violently, pulling the blanket tighter around you. The importance of those layers is undeniable. Without them, that one gust could pierce straight through your body. With them, you are shielded, however imperfectly, from the teeth of winter. There is also a certain dignity in these garments. They carry the marks of your family's resourcefulness, the patch your mother sewed last spring, the wool dyed with onion skins to give it faint color, the linen woven by your grandmother's hands decades ago. To sleep in these clothes is to wrap yourself not only in warmth but in memory. Each stitch is a story, each patch a reminder that your family has faced many winters before. Still, discomfort is unavoidable. You turn, restless, the fabric bunching beneath you, the itch of wool relentless. You scratch at your arm, then sigh, trying to find stillness again. Perhaps this is why medieval people were so accustomed to segmented sleep-waking once in the middle of the night, tossing and turning, then drifting back under again. The body, restless under layers of cloth, demanded small breaks before surrendering again to slumber. A faint murmur drifts through the hut as your sister complains about the itch of her blanket. Your mother hushes her, reminding her softly that warmth matters more than comfort. And you think, with a wry smile, that medieval parenting was often a negotiation between endurance and complaint. You close your eyes again, adjusting the cloak around your neck, and let yourself drift. The cold is still there, but dulled by the embrace of fabric and family. Your body, wrapped and weighted, finally begins to relax. And though your dreams will likely be filled with frost and discomfort, there is also a strange reassurance in knowing that, even in such hardship, you are clothed, shielded, and bound to others in the fight against the brutal winter. The night stretches on, and with it, the sound of fabric rustling, the faint itch of wool. the steady warmth of layered bodies all struggling together against the relentless cold. Sleep, imperfect as it is, returns carried not by comfort but by endurance stitched into every thread you wear. You stir again, restless in the night, and the crackle of the fire has dimmed to a faint whisper. The cold presses closer now, creeping through the gaps in the hut, and you instinctively burrow deeper under the blanket. Yet there's another source of warmth nearby, one that you have grown so accustomed to that you hardly think of it your animal companions. A mainstream historical fact is that in many medieval households, animals were not kept in separate barns or sheds, but often shared the same living space as the family. In smaller cottages and wooden huts, especially in winter, it was entirely normal for livestock to spend the night indoors. Chickens, goats, pigs, even a calf or two might huddle just a few feet away from your bed, their bodies adding precious warmth to the hut. This mingling of human and animal life may seem odd to modern sensibilities, but it was practical, efficient, and essential for survival. You shift slightly on the straw, and you hear it, the soft grunt of a pig settling into its own pile of hay near the hearth. The smell is undeniable, earthy and pungent, blending with smoke and damp wool until it becomes the scent of daily life. Somewhere in the shadows, a chicken rustles, its feathers brushing against the floor as it finds a place to roost. These sounds are part of your lullaby, familiar and oddly reassuring, for where there are animals, there is heat, and where there is heat, there is hope of making it through the night. A quirky tidbit whispers into memory. There were stories told of children who grew so fond of their animal bedfellows that they preferred the pig's warmth to that of their own siblings. A pig, after all, radiates heat like a living stove, its plump body creating a comfort that no woolen cloak could rival. You imagine the joy of resting your frozen feet against its side, the relief flooding through your body as the chill ebbs away. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread across all regions, or if it was more characteristic of Northern Europe where winters were brutal. Some scholars suggest that in wealthier parts of the continent, animals were kept separate to avoid disease and filth, while in poorer or rural communities, necessity overruled hygiene. Whatever the truth, the mingling of species under one roof left its mark on daily rhythms, shaping not only how people slept, but how they experienced life itself. You glance across the dim hut now. Your father snores softly, his body turned toward the hearth where the pig grunts. Your sister stirs, murmuring in her sleep, her small hand reaching out until it brushes the fur of a goat tethered nearby. The animal shifts but does not protest. It too is grateful for the shared warmth. Your mother's breathing is steady, rhythmic, her arm cradling the youngest child close against her chest. Around you, the hut feels less like a simple structure of wood and clay, and more like a crowded ark of survival, human and animal alike, united against the storm. The air is heavy with their mingled breath. It steams in the glow of the embers, rising in little clouds that curl upward to the rafters. Each sound adds to the nocturnal chorus, the steady thrum of snoring, the occasional bleat, the scratch of claws as a chicken shifts. It is not a quiet night, but there is safety in this symphony, a reminder that life endures even when frost claws at the door. There is another advantage to animals inside: protection. Pigs grunt at strange noises, dogs bark if something lurks outside, geese hiss at shadows. In the silence of medieval nights, these living alarms were as vital as warmth. You can almost imagine a wolf prowling near the edge of the village, deterred not by walls but by the racket of beasts within. In this way, your family shares not only warmth but watchfulness, every creature a sentinel in its own fashion. You stretch your legs again, your foot brushing against the straw where the goat lies. The warmth radiates back instantly, and for a moment you sigh with relief. Then you shift back, knowing that comfort comes with a cost. The smells that cling to your clothes, the fleas that find their way from animal hides into human bedding, the uneasy knowledge that your sleep is shared with more than just family. Yet in the hierarchy of medieval worries, warmth outranks odor, and so you accept it. Think of how this arrangement must have shaped childhood memories. A medieval child's lullabies would have included not only their mother's voice, but also the grunt of a pig, the bleat of a goat, the rustle of hens. Their dreams carried the sounds and scents of a barn, because in truth, their bedroom was part barn. And when they grew older, they would laugh at the memory, perhaps, or tell stories of winters where a cow's side was their best heater. In this dim hut, you close your eyes again, drifting with the sounds. The warmth of family, the warmth of animals, it all blends together until it is impossible to separate one from the other. The hut may be fragile, its walls thin, its roof leaking frost, but inside, it pulses with life. You breathe it in, smoke and straw and fur, and though your body aches, your heart feels steadier. Still, there is a vulnerability to this scene. Disease can spread easily in such close quarters. Fleas leap from animal to child. Illnesses find fertile ground in damp huts filled with breath. Historians still puzzle over how much this contributed to medieval health struggles, debating whether proximity to animals hardened immune systems or weakened them. Yet you, living in the moment, cannot worry about such questions. Your concern is simpler. Will the fire last until morning? Will the roof hold against snow? Will the warmth of bodies be enough? You pull the blanket tighter, pressing yourself against your sibling's side, listening to the soft grunt of the pig and the faint scratching of claws. It is strange comfort, but it is yours. And as your eyes close, you realize the night is not something you face alone. Everybody in this hut, human and animal alike, fights the cold with you. And together, perhaps, you will win this small battle against the endless winter. The night drags on, and though the animals near the hearth radiate their warmth, you cannot ignore the fading glow of the fire. You shift on the straw and watch the embers pulse faintly, like a heartbeat struggling to keep the hut alive. The fire is the center of this fragile universe, and without it, the cold would sweep in fully, unchallenged. You know this because you've felt it on nights when the flame faltered, the breath freezing in your lungs, the sting in your fingers sharp as needles, the darkness oppressive. A mainstream historical fact is that most medieval homes, especially peasant huts, had only a simple open hearth. There was no chimney, no graceful escape for the smoke, just a hole in the roof or a vent in the wall, if one was lucky. The fire burned at the center of the room, filling the hut with warmth, but also with smoke so thick that eyes watered and lungs ached. And yet, despite this discomfort, the hearth was everything. Without it, food could not be cooked, water could not be boiled, and survival through the winter nights was impossible. You cough slightly as the smoke curls low. It clings to the rafters, turning the frost black where soot settles. The air is heavy, acrid, and you feel the sting in your eyes. Yet, perversely, the smoke is also a shield. It drives away pests, helps preserve meat hung above the fire, and even lingers in the fabric of your clothes, a smoky armor against vermin. You shift your cloak around you, realizing it carries the scent of dozens of such nights, saturated with smoke that will never fully wash away. A quirky tidbit springs to mind. In some regions, families deliberately allowed fires to smolder low all night, not to avoid smoke, but because they believed evil spirits feared the acrid haze. Imagine that your stinging eyes and coughing lungs interpreted not as suffering, but as protection. Parents reassured children that the smoke kept demons away, and in the wavering half-light of winter, such a belief probably felt like truth. Historians still debate whether medieval huts were truly suffocating with smoke each night, or if clever venting and careful fire maintenance kept the air more breathable than we imagine. Some archaeological studies show blackened rafters and soot-caked walls, evidence of centuries of smoky fires. Others argue that with skill and small architectural tricks, families could keep a tolerable balance. You, curled on the straw now, can only judge by your watering eyes. Smoke is a constant companion, for better or worse. Your father shifts near the hearth, muttering to himself as he stirs the embers. He adds a small log, then blows gently, coaxing flame. The orange glow swells, flickering across the hut, illuminating faces in warm light. For a brief moment, you can see everyone clearly: your mother's tired profile, your siblings' flushed cheeks, the animals shifting in their corners. Then the light shrinks again, settling into a steady smolder. The fire itself is small, cautious. Wood is scarce in winter, and every log must be stretched to last. You remember the ritual of collecting branches during autumn, whole days spent gathering, chopping, stacking, always with the dread of whether the pile would be enough. Too little wood meant too little fire, and too little fire meant nights of suffering. The fear lingers, even now, as you hear the crackle grow weak and watch your father hesitate before adding more fuel. Your throat is dry from the smoky air, and you swallow hard. You think of how the hut smells: burnt pine resin, damp wood sizzling, smoke thick enough to cling to your hair. The scent will be in your nostrils all winter, so familiar that you may no longer notice it. Only outsiders, travelers, or visitors would comment on the oppressive haze, their eyes watering, their voices hoarse. For you, this is simply life. The animals stir in their hay as the fire flickers again. The pig grunts, the goat stretches, a chicken flaps its wings once. They too rely on the warmth, drawn closer to the hearth by instinct. The hut feels more crowded as every living being shifts toward the heat, and for a moment you think of the fire as the true master of the household. You obey it, tend it, fear it, depend on it. Without it, you are nothing but prey for the cold. There is an art to keeping it alive. Your father buries the logs with ash, creating a slow, steady burn that will last until dawn. You remember watching him as a child, marveling at the way he shaped the fire's life, coaxing it like a fragile animal. Even now, you cannot resist watching, learning, committing the motions to memory. For in winter, fire is knowledge, and knowledge is survival. And yet, there is danger too. You recall the stories whispered around the village of huts catching fire in the night, flames devouring straw and thatch, families fleeing barefoot into snow. The smoke you breathe now, protective in its own way, is also a warning of that constant risk. You roll over, listening to the crackle, wondering if tonight the flame will remain gentle, or if it might roar suddenly, greedy for air. Despite the unease, the fire lulls you. Its glow casts shadows that dance across the walls, turning cracks into shifting shapes. You watch them lazily, letting your mind wander. Some shapes look like animals, others like twisted figures, and in your half-dreaming state, they become companions, flickering in and out of vision. Your breathing slows, your body finally relaxing under the blanket. The smoke still burns your throat, but the warmth is worth it. You think of how each ember is a tiny miracle, carrying forward the promise of another dawn. You wonder if tomorrow will bring more wood, more food, more strength, or if it will simply be another day of endurance. But for now, as your eyes close again, the fire holds. The hut is alive, and in its smoky embrace, you drift once more into uneasy but necessary sleep. The hut is heavy with smells, smoke, damp wood, and something earthier that clings to the straw beneath you. As you stir, your nose wrinkles, not out of surprise but familiarity. This is the perfume of survival, and though it would horrify a visitor from a distant century, you know no other. One well-established detail from medieval households is that the mingled odors of daily life were unavoidable. The floor was not polished timber, but packed dirt, sometimes smeared with animal dung and clay to harden it. Over time, moisture crept in, hay rotted, and the air grew rich with a cocktail of scents: wet wool, burning peat, sweat, and the acrid tang of smoke. Even so, this was the norm. To step outside the hut into crisp snow might have felt cleaner, but the chill was unforgiving. Inside, you endured the smell because it came hand in hand with warmth. You draw in a breath now and catch the sharpness of damp straw where someone spilled water the day before. It blends with the sourness of fermenting ale stored in a jug by the hearth, and somewhere beneath it all lingers the musk of animals bedding down nearby. Your senses never rest, because in this confined space, everything shares the same air. One curious custom recorded in rural communities was the scattering of herbs, mint, sage, or juniper, onto the floor or into the bedding. Not only did this add a fresher scent, it was also believed to drive away vermin. You imagine your mother crushing dried leaves between her hands, the fragrance momentarily masking the smell of dung and sweat. Perhaps it worked for a short while, but the smoky haze always reclaimed its dominance. There's ongoing debate among scholars about how medieval people truly perceived these odors. Were they dulled to them, their senses hardened by routine, or did they long, quietly, for relief, dreaming of the rare, clean scent of linen washed in icy rivers? Modern noses recoil at descriptions of reek and rot, but perhaps in their time, such smells were simply invisible, part of the backdrop of existence. The walls of the hut themselves added their own contribution to the aroma. Built of logs sealed with clay and dung, they released a musty tang whenever dampness seeped in. Touching the wall with your palm left an earthy residue. In summer, the smell was sharper, almost grassy. In winter, it thickened, heavy with trapped moisture and smoke. Your body adjusts, though. You notice that after a few moments, you no longer register the strength of the odors until a new one is added. A waft of charred wood from the hearth, a sudden whiff of goat, or the sharp tang of someone's unwashed feet. Each arrival makes the air shift again, layering scent upon scent until the hut becomes a tapestry of survival. You smile faintly, recalling how children sometimes played games guessing the source of smells. A sibling might wrinkle their nose and accuse another of bringing the pig stench into the bedding. Another would counter with laughter, pointing at the boots drying by the door. Humor softened the burden, even when the truth was undeniable. Everything smelled because everything was alive, enclosed, and enduring together. From outside, the wind whistles, cold and clean. You imagine the contrast of stepping into it, your lungs filling with air so sharp it stings, only to retreat moments later, desperate for the warmth of the hut. The odor within, however heavy, suddenly feels preferable when weighed against frostbite. You realize that survival reshapes values. A smoky, pungent hut means life. Fresh air, if it kills you, is no luxury. The sensory overload influences your dreams too. When you drift into slumber, scents bleed into visions. Smoke becomes shadowy figures. The sourness of ale morphs into strange feasts. The musk of animals into phantom herds running across snowy fields. Medieval dreams were never silent or scentless, they were crowded, just as their waking hours were. Experts haven't reached consensus on whether these odors contributed to the spread of disease. Some medical historians argue that poor air quality weakened lungs, feeding illnesses like consumption. Others insist the smoke, despite discomfort, may have sterilized the air, reducing infection risks. Whatever the truth, you know what you feel. Your eyes sting, your throat rasps, but without this smoky haze you would be far colder, far hungrier, and far less alive. You curl deeper into the blanket now, closing your eyes against the sting of ash. Your skin prickles from the damp straw, your nose twitches at the musk of animals, but there is comfort hidden in it all. These scents are the rhythm of your life, binding you to the hut, to your family, to the animals sharing the air. And though modern noses might call it unbearable, to you, it is the smell of home. The embers glow faintly, and the shadows dance once more across smoke-stained rafters. You let the heaviness of the hut's atmosphere settle over you like another blanket. It is imperfect, pungent, and suffocating at times, but it is yours. With it comes the promise that another dawn will arrive, and with dawn, the fragile continuation of life in this wooden shell. The glow of the fire dips low again, but this time your father does not feed it. Instead, he kneels carefully, scooping ash with practiced hands, burying the coals beneath a grey blanket of dust. You watch drowsily, wondering why he hides the very thing that keeps you alive. Yet you've seen this ritual countless times, and you know its purpose: to preserve fire until morning without wasting precious wood. Records from the period make clear that banking embers was a nightly ritual in countless medieval households. Without matches or easy fire-making tools, letting flames die entirely meant hours of labor to rekindle them. Flint and steel could spark, yes, but coaxing a flame from dry tinder in damp winter air was a frustrating gamble. So families tended their embers like fragile treasures, tucking them into ash where they could smolder safely until dawn. You remember how, as a child, you were mesmerized by the glowing coals. They looked alive, breathing slowly, pulsing red beneath their blanket of ash. Your father would hush you when you tried to poke at them, warning that too much air would kill the glow. Even now, you resist the temptation to stir them yourself. The embers are patient but fragile, and careless fingers can end a family's warmth in seconds. One curious custom sometimes mentioned in village lore was the belief that if embers died during the night, it was a sign of bad luck for the household. Some families even whispered small charms over the hearth, half prayer and half habit, to ensure the glow lasted until sunrise. You can imagine your grandmother muttering her words in the dark, pressing a cross of ash onto the hearthstone before covering the fire. Whether or not the charm worked, the act itself gave reassurance. Academic circles remain divided on exactly how effective this method was. Some argue that smothering embers under ash produced carbon monoxide and made huts dangerously smoky, while others believe the technique was surprisingly safe when done with care. Archaeological finds of hearths layered in ash suggest the practice was widespread, so perhaps the truth lies in the balance. Too much ash suffocated the flame, too little allowed it to flare. The skill was in judgment, honed by long winters and endless nights of practice. You picture the embers now, faint and hidden, yet still breathing. The hut darkens without the flame, leaving only soft orange glimmers seeping through the ash. It feels as though the heart of the house has been tucked to bed, just as the family has. Around you, bodies settle again, sighing into slumber. The pig grunts once and curls deeper into straw. The goat exhales. Your sister murmurs in her sleep. The night resumes its rhythm, quieter now, soothed by the certainty that warmth waits beneath the ashes. The act of banking embers also carried symbolic weight. Fire was not just a tool but a sacred presence. In some communities, hearth fires were never allowed to die, passed from one generation to the next like a living heirloom. You imagine a bride carrying glowing coals from her childhood home to her new household, kindling her married life with continuity of flame. Such gestures remind you that fire was more than heat, it was identity, connection, and even blessing. You shift slightly, pulling your cloak higher, and remember times when the fire did go out. Those mornings were miserable. Your father crouched with flint and steel, sparks flying uselessly onto damp tinder, while everyone huddled and shivered. The memory alone makes you appreciate the faint glow hidden under the ash tonight. Survival feels lighter when you know the fire still breathes. There is also a practical rhythm to it. The banking of embers signals that the household's day is truly done. The chores are finished, the animals fed, the pallet claimed. No more work will be attempted until daylight. It is the medieval equivalent of switching off the last light, a closing ritual that binds the family into one shared act of rest. You close your eyes, comforted by the knowledge that the fire has been put to sleep just as you have. Still, you wonder, what if a gust of wind sneaks through the cracks and snuffs it out? What if the ash shifts and the coals cool too quickly? The uncertainty is always there, lurking in the back of your mind. Yet worry cannot change the outcome. Like so much in your world, it rests on trust. Trust in skill, in practice, in the stubborn resilience of fire itself. You exhale into the dark, your breath curling like smoke, and let the faint warmth of the banked embers seep into your bones. Tomorrow, they will be uncovered, coaxed back to flame, and the cycle will continue. For now, you rest in the quiet knowledge that your family has carried fire into another night, guarding it like a secret, fragile flame against the winter's endless hunger. The hut grows still again, wrapped in silence, punctuated only by the faint sigh of ash settling. You let your eyelids droop, body heavy with fatigue. Somewhere deep inside the hearth, beneath its dusty shroud, the embers glow patiently. You imagine them like tiny guardians, waiting in the dark, ensuring that when the sun rises, warmth will greet you once more. And with that thought, you finally drift, soothed by the hidden heartbeat of fire sleeping under ash. The night stretches long, and as your body shifts restlessly on the straw, you realize that true sleep comes in fragments. You never sink into an unbroken dream from dusk until dawn. Instead, your eyes open again and again, your mind pulled between fatigue and alertness. This pattern is not unique to you, it belongs to your age, to your time, to everyone in huts like this scattered across the wintry world. One well-documented detail of medieval rest is the pattern of segmented sleep. Instead of one continuous slumber, people often drifted off soon after nightfall, then awoke in the middle of the night for a stretch of quiet wakefulness, before returning to a second sleep until dawn. Diaries, sermons, and even medical texts mention this rhythm as though it were entirely natural. In the absence of artificial light, darkness itself seemed to shape the body's hours. You feel it now. After only a few hours under the patchwork quilt, you stir awake, your eyes drawn to the faint red glow of the banked embers. Around you, your family shifts as well. Your father coughs softly, your sister rolls over, your mother stirs enough to soothe the baby. The hut is alive with subtle movements, half asleep but not entirely. No one speaks loudly, voices stay hushed, as though words themselves might break the fragile thread of warmth binding everyone together. You sit up slightly, rubbing your eyes, listening. Outside, the wind moans through the trees and snow hisses softly as it drifts from the roof. The night feels eternal, and yet, in this pause, you sense the peculiar intimacy of these hours. They are neither day nor night, but something in between, a time when thoughts wander and fears grow sharper. There's ongoing debate among modern researchers about why segmented sleep was so common. Some suggest it was dictated by biology, with the human body naturally tuned to wakefulness after a first rest. Others argue it was shaped by necessity, fires needed tending, animals checked, and dangers kept at bay. Whatever the cause, this rhythm gave nights a strange duality, half dreams, half waking, both shaping life in the hut. You remember your father telling you stories during these hours, not long tales meant for the whole family, but whispered fragments, passed from parent to child in the dark. Legends of saints who braved icy mountains, of villagers who outsmarted wolves, of spirits who prowled on snowbound nights. The stories weren't just entertainment, they soothed your restless mind, turned fear into something manageable, even if only for a while. Sometimes these midnight hours were practical. Your mother might rise quietly to mend a torn hem by the glow of embers, her fingers quick and skilled. Or she might prepare dough, ready to bake when dawn arrived. Neighbors, too, used this time. Some accounts describe villagers visiting each other between first and second sleep, sharing ale, prayers, or hushed conversations. The night, though dangerous, also carried its own social rhythm. You shift again on the straw, listening to your siblings breathing. They too stir in their sleep, scratching at woolen blankets, muttering in half-dream voices. The closeness of bodies ensures that no one ever sleeps entirely undisturbed. A sneeze, a cough, the shifting of straw all ripple through the nest, pulling one awake as another dozes off. Sleep becomes not an individual act, but a communal pattern, woven together like the threads of your patched quilt. You think of how strange this might seem to someone from centuries ahead, used to quiet rooms and electric lamps. To them, waking at midnight might feel like restlessness or illness. But here, in your hut, it is simply the way of things. The night itself is too long to endure without interruption. Breaking it in half gives it rhythm, makes it survivable. One odd habit whispered among villagers was the use of these hours for prayer. Some believed the soul was most open to heaven in the middle of the night, when the world was hushed. Kneeling before the hearth, clasping hands in smoky darkness, they asked saints for protection against frost, wolves, or sickness. Perhaps you have done the same once or twice, whispering words that rose into smoke curling toward the rafters. Experts continue to puzzle over how this segmented sleep shaped medieval psychology. Did the wakeful hours encourage deeper dreams? Did they foster creativity, quiet reflection, or even mystical visions? In sermons and confessions, people spoke of temptations and visions that came in the midnight pause, as though the boundary between waking and dreaming blurred. You lean back against the wall now, staring at the faint shimmer of frost above you. The silence is thick, broken only by the faint snore of your father and the occasional rustle of the pig in its corner. The air is still smoky, but less suffocating than before, the embers breathing quietly under their ash blanket. This is the time for thoughts, for wondering, for listening to your own heartbeat echo in the hush. Then, slowly, the rhythm of sleep reclaims you. Your eyelids droop, your body softens, and you ease back into the straw. Around you, others do the same. One by one, your family settles again into second sleep, drifting into dreams that will carry you all until morning. The segmented night, strange to some, feels natural to you. The cold remains, but broken sleep has become a shield, a way of surviving the endless winter hours, one fragment at a time. And as you surrender once more, you realize that this rhythm, wake, rest, mirrors the very cycle of survival itself. Never perfect, never seamless, but always enduring, carrying you from one fragile dawn to the next. You jolt slightly at a sound beyond the wall, a long, low howl that threads through the wind. Your first thought is wolves. The second is raiders. Neither is comforting. For a moment you hold your breath, straining to listen, while your heart quickens under the blanket. Out here, in a wooden hut on the edge of winter's grip, the night carries more than cold. It carries danger. Contemporary chronicles make clear that wolves were a constant concern in medieval Europe. Harsh winters drove them closer to villages, their hunger pushing them to stalk livestock and, on desperate nights, even children. Tales abounded of travelers vanishing on snowy paths, their fate marked only by tracks leading into the forest. And though the truth may have been less dramatic than the stories, the fear was real. Wolves were not mythical monsters, they were predators with teeth and hunger, and the flimsy walls of a wooden hut offered little defense. You tighten your blanket around your shoulders, peering into the shadows where your siblings sleep unaware. Your father stirs too, lifting his head as though he heard the same sound. He doesn't rise, just listens, his hand resting on the staff he keeps near the door. The silence that follows is heavier than the howl itself, stretching until you wonder if you imagined it. Then, the wind picks up, whistling through the cracks in the wall, and the sound dissolves into its roar. One odd superstition often repeated around village fires was that wolves could be kept at bay by hanging sprigs of juniper or iron charms above the door. Whether effective or not, such rituals gave families a sense of control against forces beyond their power. You remember your mother tying a bundle of herbs to the hut's beam last winter, her hands steady though her eyes betrayed her own unease. There's ongoing scholarly disagreement about how frequent raids by bandits or hostile neighbors truly were during winter. Some argue that harsh weather deterred attackers, while others point to records of burned villages and stolen food stores as evidence that hunger made men as dangerous as wolves. Whatever the statistics, the fear ran deep enough to haunt the dreams of those who slept in huts like yours. Every creak in the timbers, every gust against the roof, could be a warning of footsteps in the snow. You shift uneasily, your ears tuned to the night. The hut groans as wind presses against it, beams creaking like voices. A chicken flutters its wings suddenly, startled, and the goat bleats softly in its tether. The pig, however, sleeps on, a lump of warmth indifferent to dangers beyond the walls. You exhale slowly, reminding yourself that animals often sense threats first if they rest easy. Perhaps you can too. Yet your imagination refuses to quiet. You picture wolves circling outside, paws pressing into fresh snow, their breath steaming in the cold. You picture raiders with cloaks pulled tight, eyes gleaming under helmets, seeking food, fire, or worse. The thin door between you and them feels flimsy as parchment. In truth, it is nothing more than a wooden plank braced with a stone. One story your grandmother told returns to you now, of a family so poor they invited their pig into the bedding heap each night, and one winter, the pig's squeals saved them from wolves that tried to break through the door. Whether true or not, the story is retold because it carries the message that survival often depends on unlikely allies. You reach out and rest your hand on the fur of the goat beside you, feeling its steady warmth. Perhaps that story wasn't so far-fetched after all. Modern researchers often debate how much of medieval fear was based on reality and how much was magnified by folklore. Was the wolf population truly overwhelming, or did their occasional presence loom larger in the imagination? Were raids a daily threat, or rare but terrifying enough to scar memory for generations? The evidence is fragmented, leaving room for interpretation. But for you, lying here now, the distinction hardly matters. Fear feels real when you hear a howl in the dark. The silence stretches again, broken only by the slow breathing of your family. Your father settles back down, satisfied that the threat has passed, but you remain tense, your ears straining for another sound. The hut seems smaller, tighter, with danger pressing at its edges. And yet, you know this is part of life. Nights are never free of unease. You draw the blanket tighter still, tucking your chin, and remind yourself that this moment is not unique. Generations before you have lain in similar huts, hearing similar howls, clutching similar blankets. The fear of what lurks beyond wooden walls is woven into the fabric of winter life, as much a part of survival as fire or food. Gradually, exhaustion softens your edges. Your mind dulls. Your body sinks into the straw once more. The wolves may circle, raiders may wander, but the hut still stands, its walls holding against the storm. You let your eyes close, whispering a half-formed prayer into the smoky dark. Protection, warmth, survival, these are all you ask. And as your breath slows, you surrender once more to uneasy sleep, fragile but enduring in the heart of winter's threat. The night presses on, and though the howls have faded, the cold creeps steadily upward from the floor. You curl tighter into your cloak, shifting on the straw to find even the smallest patch of warmth. The ground itself feels alive with chill, as though the earth beneath the hut is exhaling frost into your bones. Without protection, no one could rest here long. Contemporary accounts confirm that medieval sleepers rarely lay directly on the earthen floor. Instead, they layered straw, hay, reeds, or rushes to create a barrier between their bodies and the icy ground. This was the peasant's mattress, humble, scratchy, and temporary, but essential. Even the thinnest layer of plant matter made the difference between tolerable cold and bone-deep agony. You shift again and feel the uneven surface beneath you. Straw pricks your skin where the blanket has slipped aside, its texture rough but familiar. Some stalks have flattened under weeks of use, leaving little insulation. Others still hold pockets of air, keeping you slightly lifted above the damp earth. It isn't comfortable, not like the featherbeds lords boasted of, but it is enough to survive. One odd practice villagers sometimes followed was mixing animal hides into the bedding. Freshly cleaned sheepskins or deerskins, laid fur side up, gave warmth that straw alone couldn't provide. You remember the nights when your father returned from the hunt with a hide still smelling of the forest stretched out beneath your family. The fur tickled your legs, but it trapped heat, and everyone crowded closer to it. A single skin felt like a treasure in midwinter. Experts haven't reached a consensus on how frequently bedding was changed or replaced. Some argue that straw pallets were renewed every few weeks, while others suggest families stretched them through an entire season. no matter how filthy. Archaeological remains of rushes pressed deep into house floors suggest both possibilities, depending on wealth and diligence. In truth, you know that once the snow falls and fields lie buried, gathering fresh straw is no easy task. Families endure the stench and the itch until spring. You scratch at your arm, half in dream, half in irritation. Fleas live in the straw, biting at exposed skin. They are part of the night, like smoke or hunger. Your sister stirs beside you, slapping at her leg before rolling over with a groan. You wonder how anyone ever sleeps fully under such constant discomfort, but then again, what choice do you have? Fatigue is stronger than irritation, and exhaustion always wins. The smell of the bedding is heavy too. Straw absorbs everything. Sweat, spilled ale, spilled milk, the musk of animals. Over weeks, the odor becomes dense, mingling with smoke and damp wood until it seems to cling to your very skin. And yet, you can't imagine sleep without it. A bare floor would freeze you, and fancier mattresses are dreams for nobles and priests, not for families in huts like yours. You think of those nobles, tucked into wooden frames raised above the floor, lying on thick mattresses stuffed with feathers, wool, or down. Curtains drawn around the bed to hold warmth in. Servants to fetch fresh rushes, perfumes to mask odors. Their world feels like another universe. Here, your mattress is shared. It's stuffing both gift and burden, but it is yours. Sometimes, villagers tried to improve the pallet with tricks passed down through generations. One was to place warmed stones beneath the straw, wrapped in cloth so they wouldn't scorch. Another was to add layers of bracken fern, whose stiff leaves kept dampness at bay. These little innovations gave brief relief, though they were never perfect. You picture your grandmother showing you how to arrange fern leaves in a crisscross, explaining that they lasted longer than straw, her wrinkled hands moving with practiced ease. There's debate among social historians about whether peasants truly minded their humble bedding. Some argue that people grew used to discomfort, their standards simply different from ours. Others suggest they longed constantly for better, envying the lords whose sleep was cushioned and sweet-smelling. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps they envied and endured in equal measure. You lie still, your ear pressed close to the bedding, and listen. The straw whispers faintly as your sister shifts, a sound like dry grass in summer. You can hear mice scuttling somewhere beneath, bold enough to claim scraps that fell from supper. The earth smells faintly of mildew where the snow seeped in near the door, reminding you that no barrier is ever perfect. And yet, despite everything, the fleas, the stench, the uneven lumps, you begin to understand the comfort hidden in this bed. It is not softness that soothes you, but familiarity. Every stalk, every rustle, every prickle has been with you night after night, binding you to family and to place. This is not a bed of luxury, but of belonging. Your eyes grow heavy again, your body surrendering to the crude embrace of straw and hides. You sigh, adjusting your cloak so that no patch of skin is exposed to the draught. Around you, others shift too, every movement reshaping the communal mattress beneath. It is noisy, lumpy, and imperfect, but it is warm enough, secure enough, and yours enough to let sleep take you once more. And so, in the wooden hut, on straw layered thin against frozen ground, you close your eyes, carried into dreams, not by comfort, but by endurance, by necessity, and by the shared warmth of survival. The hut hums with noises that never stop. You lie awake for a moment, not because of the cold this time, but because your ears have caught the layered chorus of night. It is never truly silent here. The sounds shift and overlap, weaving themselves into the fragile fabric of sleep. Some soothe you, others unsettle you, but all remind you that the hut is alive. Written descriptions from the period emphasize how constant sound was in medieval homes. Thin walls, open hearths, and shared living meant no separation between one life and another. Privacy was almost unknown. You heard every cough, every rustle, every murmur. At night, this intimacy became more obvious. Sleep was not an isolated silence, but a communal soundscape. You listen closely now. The timbers creak above your head, stretched and bent by the weight of snow. The roof shifts with faint cracks, like joints in an old man's knees. In the corner, your father snores in long, steady rumbles, broken by the occasional cough as the smoke irritates his lungs. Your mother breathes more lightly, her breath soft as the sigh of fabric. Beside you, your sister mutters in her sleep, words half-formed and unintelligible. One detail preserved in travelers' diaries is how striking the nighttime chorus was when they visited peasant homes. Outsiders, unused to the crowded arrangements, wrote of restless bodies, shared snores, whispered dreams, and the constant scuttle of vermin. For you, born into it, the sound is no more unusual than wind in the trees. You know each noise by heart, can even identify which sibling kicks in their sleep and which breathes like a bellows. A curious habit sometimes mentioned in village lore was the belief that a noisy sleeper was safer than a silent one. If someone's breathing grew too quiet, family members would nudge them awake, fearing the silence meant death had crept into the hut. You remember your mother bending over your brother one night, shaking him gently until he groaned in irritation, only then relaxing with relief at the sound. Experts continue to debate whether medieval people slept more lightly because of these constant interruptions, or whether their bodies simply adapted to rest in shorter, shallower cycles. Some argue that chronic fatigue was common, explaining why peasants often napped during daylight hours. Others believe the body adjusted, learning to rest even amid snores, coughs, and creaking walls. The truth may lie somewhere between, never fully rested, yet resilient enough to endure. The sounds outside the hut join the chorus inside. Wind wails through the gaps, sometimes sounding eerily like voices. Snow slides off the thatch with muffled thumps. In the distance, a dog barks someone else in the village keeping watch, or perhaps answering a howl deeper in the woods. These noises seep into your half-dreams, turning them into strange stories. In one moment you dream of storms and collapsing beams, in another of wolves scratching at the door. Yet not all sounds are fearful. Some are oddly comforting. The crackle of a log as it flares in the embers reassures you that warmth still breathes in the hearth. The soft grunt of the pig nearby, the flutter of hens settling on their perch, the rhythmic chewing of the goat, all of these tell you that life endures. They are lullabies of survival, each one anchoring you to the present. You shift on the straw, adjusting your ears to the quieter noises, the faint scratch of a mouse near the food stores, the drip of melted snow sneaking through the roof into a wooden bucket. These are reminders of the hut's fragility. It is not a fortress, not a palace, just a temporary shelter patched together with whatever materials could be found. Its voice is full of leaks and scratches and creaks, and yet, to you, it is home. Sometimes, the night brings unexpected music. You remember evenings when your mother hummed to soothe the children, her low voice blending with the hiss of wind, or when your father, restless in segmented sleep, whispered prayers to saints, the words muffled but steady. Even now, if you strain, you can hear your sister singing softly in her dream, a half-remembered lullaby. These fragile threads of melody float in the smoky air, offering small comfort against the cold. Some scholars argue that this constant soundscape shaped medieval memory and imagination. Without silence, dreams and waking life blurred, influenced by every creak and cough. Folklore of spirits and omens may have been seeded in these nights, when a groan of timber was mistaken for a phantom's cry, or a snore for a whispered warning. To live in such sound was to live in a world where reality and imagination constantly mingled. You pull the blanket tighter, letting the noises wash over you. They are distracting, yes, but they are also reassuring. Every sound means something: life, movement, protection, survival. Silence would be far worse. Silence would mean the fire has died, the animals have frozen, the family has stopped breathing. Noise is proof of endurance. Your eyelids grow heavy as the hut continues its restless song. The chorus does not stop, you know it never will, but gradually it becomes background, steady and predictable. Like a lullaby, it guides you back into slumber. You surrender. Your last thought, a simple one, that this crowded, noisy hut, with all its imperfections, holds the fragile symphony of life against the brutal winter outside. Your stomach grumbles, faint but insistent, tugging you from the edge of second sleep. Hunger is another companion in winter, almost as constant as the cold. You open your eyes and see the faint outline of your mother moving near the hearth. She lifts a small loaf from a cloth and breaks it into pieces, handing one to your father first, then to each child who stirs awake. Accounts from the Middle Ages tell us that simple food before bed was a common custom, not for luxury but for survival. Bread crusts, porridge, or a sip of warm ale settled the stomach, easing discomfort and making it easier to sleep through the long, freezing night. Without this small ritual, hunger gnawed too fiercely, disturbing rest and leaving the body weaker by morning. You chew slowly on your piece of bread, the crust hard from days of storage. It tastes faintly sour, the way bread often did when made with rough ground grains and sourdough starters. The dryness sticks in your throat, but you wash it down with a swallow of thin ale your mother presses into your hand. The liquid is warm from sitting near the embers. Its taste bitter but strangely soothing. You feel heat spread faintly through your chest, dulling both chill and hunger. Travelers' diaries sometimes remark on how little variety peasants had in their nighttime meals. Unlike nobles who dined late with roasted meats and sweetened wines, families in huts like yours made do with whatever was at hand, often the same bread and ale repeated endlessly. Yet even monotony was comfort. Hunger did not demand flavor, it demanded substance. One curious practice recorded in rural villages was warming stones in the fire and then placing small pots of thin broth beside them so that the liquid stayed warm until bedtime. Families would sip the broth like medicine, savoring the steam as much as the taste. You can imagine such a scene here. Your sister cupping her hands around the pot, eyes closing in relief as the warmth fogs her face. Scholars remain divided over how nutritious these nighttime meals truly were. Some argue that ale, low in alcohol and rich in calories, gave peasants vital energy. Others point out that diluted gruel and hard bread did little to replenish the exhaustion of winter labor. Whatever the truth, you know the comfort it brings now. Your belly no longer aches so sharply, and your mind grows calmer. The smell of food, faint as it is, fills the hut. Smoke mixes with the sour tang of ale, the earthy scent of bread, and the faint sweetness of dried onions your mother sometimes added to dough. These aromas, though humble, feel luxurious compared to the bitter odor of straw and dung that dominates most hours. For a moment, as you swallow the last bite, you feel warmed from within, not just without. Your father takes his sip last, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He mutters a quiet thanks, not to anyone in particular, perhaps to the saints, perhaps to the grain, perhaps simply to life itself. This ritual of eating together, even if only scraps, binds the family as surely as the straw pallet. It is a reminder that though resources are meager, they are shared. You settle back onto the bedding, pulling the blanket close again. Your stomach feels steadier, your head light with the warmth of ale. Hunger is not gone. It never is in winter, but it is softened enough for sleep to return. You think of how many nights before this have followed the same pattern. Fire dwindling, embers banked, bread shared, bodies huddled. Each repetition weaves endurance into routine. Oddly, dreams come easier on a full stomach. You recall once dreaming of a feast, tables piled with roasted meats, sweet cakes dripping with honey, pitchers of wine. You woke with your mouth watering and your belly aching worse than ever. Tonight, you hope for gentler dreams. Fields of grain in summer, the smell of baking bread carried on warm breezes. Perhaps the mind, like the body, clings to nourishment in whatever form it can find. Experts studying medieval diets often highlight how winter forced people into scarcity. Fresh vegetables were gone, meat was rare unless salted or smoked, and dairy was limited when animals produced less in the cold. Nighttime meals, therefore, were not feasts but rationed scraps. Yet even scraps served a deeper purpose. They were psychological comfort, proof that the family would not face the night entirely empty. You licked the last crumbs from your fingers, tasting the sourness of the bread one more time. Your sister burrows against your side, sighing in relief after her share. The pig grunts in the corner, perhaps jealous of the food, perhaps only dreaming. The hut settles again, the sounds softening, the warmth of the hearth mingling with the warmth of full bellies. As you drift, you realize that food at night is more than sustenance. It is ritual, reassurance, and memory. It anchors the body to the present, and the soul to hope that tomorrow there will still be bread, still be ale, still be enough to share. And with that thought, you close your eyes, your hunger dulled, your mind eased, and your body finally willing to surrender once again to the embrace of winter sleep. The bread has eased your stomach, and the ale has warmed your chest, but the night remains long, and your thoughts drift toward forces less visible than wolves or hunger. In the flickering darkness, whispers stir of spirits and demons that lurk in the cold. You shiver, not only from the draught that slips through the cracks in the wall, but from the stories you've heard since childhood, tales that make winter nights more haunting than any predator could. Medieval writings reveal that people filled the gaps in their knowledge with superstition, especially when it came to explaining the dangers of winter. When a family froze despite a fire, when sickness swept through a hut, or when animals died mysteriously, many believed that frost demons or wandering spirits were to blame. These unseen forces were said to prowl in the darkest hours, slipping in through gaps in the walls or down the chimney hole, feeding on breath and warmth. You remember your grandmother telling you about the frost hag, a crooked figure said to wander from hut to hut, placing her icy fingers on sleeping children's faces. If the fire burned low, the child would not wake by morning. To ward her off, families sometimes left iron scissors on the threshold or a sprig of juniper above the door. Your mother still follows that practice, tucking a charm into the rafters with quiet determination. One curious belief that lingers in your mind is the use of whispered chants before bed. Some households recited the same phrases nightly, not unlike prayers, asking saints to guard them from night fiends. You've heard your father murmur such words under his breath, his voice low and gravelly, as though he feared being overheard by the very things he tried to repel. Whether the words had power or not, they gave the family a sense of control in a world full of uncertainty. Historians continue to question how seriously peasants held to these superstitions. Some argue that faith in charms was absolute, shaping daily rituals and choices. Others suggest it was more of a cultural habit, repeated because it felt wrong not to. But lying here in the smoky dark, hearing the hut creak as if alive, you understand why people clung to the idea of unseen protectors. The world outside is too vast, too hostile, to face without belief in something watching over you. You glance at the rafters, seeing the frost sparkle faintly where moonlight slips through a crack. The sight makes you pull the blanket tighter. It feels as though eyes might peer through that gap, watching silently. Your sister stirs beside you, muttering a prayer in her half-dream, and you wonder if her dreams, too, are haunted by these stories. Children absorb them deeply, carrying the fears of their elders into restless sleep. At times, superstitions even shaped how people positioned themselves in bed. Families sometimes placed children in the middle of the sleeping heap, believing the outer edges were more vulnerable to spirits or cold demons. You feel that protection now, pressed between your sister and brother, their small bodies barriers against both frost and fear. Your parents lie at the edges, shielding you, their warmth and presence acting as charms in themselves. One odd tidbit from folk practices mentions that some people smeared salt around the doorframe, believing it formed a barrier against evil. You recall seeing this once in a neighbor's hut, a faint crust of white, sprinkled deliberately as if it were armor. Salt was precious, but so was peace of mind. You imagine the family sleeping easier that night, not because the salt had power, but because they believed it did. Experts have long noted how thin the line was between religion and superstition in these practices. A prayer to a saint might blend seamlessly with a charm of iron or a muttered spell inherited from pagan roots. In the smoky dark of winter huts, there was little room for theological debate. Anything that promised safety was welcome. You let your eyes close, whispering a small phrase you've heard countless times. Keep the frost away. Keep the fire awake. The words are simple, childish perhaps, but they carry a rhythm that soothes you. Your breathing slows, and though the fear of unseen visitors lingers at the edge of your mind, the charm comforts you enough to drift again. The hut groans once more, the wind hisses against the roof, and you imagine for a fleeting second that the frost hag herself is passing by. But you are tucked within warmth, shielded by family, guarded by fire, hidden under ash. Whatever lurks outside will find no entrance here tonight. And with that, you slip once more into uneasy sleep, wrapped not only in blankets but in layers of belief, hope, and whispered charms, proof that even in the darkest winters, people clung to stories as tightly as they clung to life itself. The hut is hushed again, but this silence carries its own weight. You roll slightly on the straw, listening not for wolves or spirits, but for something subtler, the absence of chatter. Everyone has fallen still, and the air feels fragile, as though words themselves might shatter it. Medieval diaries and court records hint that many families observed an unspoken rule of quiet during winter nights. Whispered conversations were acceptable, but loud voices were rare. Talking too much wasted breath in smoky air, and raising your voice risked disturbing the careful balance of rest. In a hut where 10 or more bodies sometimes shared one space, silence was a survival tactic. You feel it now. The restraint, the way your parents' murmurs fade quickly, the way children are hushed with a soft touch. There is no need to explain it, it is simply understood. Words will wait for daylight. The night belongs to listening, conserving, enduring. One curious note in monastic writings observes that silence itself was believed to preserve strength. Just as fasting was thought to strengthen the soul, holding the tongue at night was thought to preserve the body's warmth. Whether superstition or practical wisdom, the rule carried weight. You can almost hear your grandmother's voice repeating, "Still tongues, warm bones." Scholarly voices remain divided on whether this nighttime quiet was universally practiced or only observed in some communities. Some argue that large households would have been too noisy, while others insist that villagers valued peace deeply in the hours of rest. Yet here in the hut, silence settles like another blanket, tucking everyone into the same rhythm. You shift and hear the faintest rustle of straw beneath you. That small sound feels almost scandalous, as though it breaks the pact. Your sister sighs in her sleep, and your mother adjusts the baby's position with care. But even these movements are soft, deliberately muted. No one wants to pierce the fragile calm. The hut itself seems to honor the rule. The fire smolders quietly, embers hidden under ash, their glow faint but steady. The wind outside has eased, replaced by the muffled hush of snow falling. The timbers creak only occasionally, as though even the wood understands the hour demands restraint. You find yourself reflecting on how unusual this quiet is compared to daytime. In the daylight hours, the hut is loud. Children playing, animals bleating, parents arguing, tools clattering. The contrast makes night silence feel sacred, a time when the world presses pause. Even hunger and fear seem softer in these still hours. One odd custom recorded in village chronicles was the belief that whispering at night could call attention from wandering spirits. Some families forbade any talk once the fire was banked, fearing that voices might attract something lurking in the dark. Whether you believe it or not, you've noticed how quickly your father hushes conversation once embers dim. It's less about faith in spirits, more about respect for tradition, and perhaps respect for fear itself. Experts suggest that such enforced quiet may have shaped medieval sleep more than we realize. Without words to distract, minds turned inward, leading to vivid dreams, reflections, and even mystical experiences. Sermons from the time describe people claiming to hear divine voices in the middle of the night, but perhaps it was only their own thoughts echoing louder in the absence of sound. You pull the blanket up to your chin, the silence pressing closer. At first, it feels heavy, but then it becomes soothing. Without chatter, your breathing seems louder, steadier. The hush allows you to hear smaller sounds, the crackle of straw under your sister's elbow, the faint drip of water into a bucket, the flutter of a hen's wing. These tiny noises become the night's lullaby, gentle and unobtrusive. Gradually, you understand why silence was treasured. It isn't only about conserving breath or keeping the peace. It is about creating space for survival itself, to rest, to listen, to endure. Words are heavy, silence is light. In winter, every ounce of energy matters. You close your eyes, sinking into the hush. The quiet stretches, wrapping around you like wool. Soon, even your thoughts begin to fade, dissolving into the smoky darkness. Silence is not emptiness, it is shelter. And in its embrace, you drift once more into slumber, trusting that the night will carry you gently toward dawn. A faint murmur breaks the silence. It isn't a warning or a quarrel, it's a lullaby. Your eyes open just enough to catch the glow of embers reflected on your mother's face as she hums softly, rocking the baby in her arms. The tune is low and repetitive, more vibration than melody, yet it threads through the smoky air like a thread of warmth. Historical records and folklore collections suggest that lullabies were deeply embedded in medieval culture. They weren't polished songs meant for performance, but simple, often improvised chants designed to calm children and steady weary adults. The repetition, the soothing rhythm, the familiar words, all of it worked like a charm against fear and restlessness. You listen now, recognizing the melody though it has no real name. It's the same one you've heard since childhood, sung on countless nights when storms raged or wolves howled. It speaks not of grand adventures but of everyday hopes, that the fire holds, that the snow softens, that the family wakes whole in the morning. One detail recorded in village traditions is how these songs often carried small warnings, tucked gently into verses. A mother might sing about frost spirits kept away by saints, or about children who stayed under blankets lest the cold snatch them. The lullaby soothed, but it also taught. You hear that now as your mother's words drift in and out. A reminder not to stir from the bedding, not to fear the shadows, to stay safe in sleep's embrace. Researchers remain divided on whether these songs were purely functional or carried deeper ritual meaning. Some argue they were just practical tools to quiet children. Others suggest they held spiritual significance, weaving superstition and faith into nightly routines. Listening here, you feel both explanations ring true. The song is practical, it calms your brother's squirming, but it also feels like a prayer, soft and unbroken. Your sister shifts beside you, eyes fluttering as she half wakes, then sighs and sinks back into slumber, lulled as much by the sound as the warmth of the bedding. Even you, older now, feel its pull. The melody is like smoke curling around the rafters, wrapping the entire hut in a cocoon. One curious tidbit noted in folk records is that lullabies were sometimes sung not only for children but also for livestock. Shepherds crooned to lambs, farmers to calves, believing that gentle sound eased both beasts and humans. You imagine your mother humming the same tune in the barnyard, soothing goats as easily as children. In a world where survival bound people and animals together, music was a bridge of comfort. The hut seems to change as the song continues. The creaks of the beams, the sighs of sleepers, the distant howl of wind all fall into rhythm with the melody. The world feels smaller, safer, as though the song itself guards the doorway against cold and fear. Even the baby, once restless, stills completely, his tiny breath sinking with the cadence. Experts point out that lullabies often carried melancholy undertones, reflecting the hardships of life. Unlike modern songs of sweetness, medieval lullabies sometimes spoke of hunger, death, or endless winter. Yet paradoxically, these darker notes provided comfort. Naming the hardships gave them form, and giving them form made them easier to face. Your mother's tune carries this duality. It is tender but edged with sorrow, reminding you that survival is never guaranteed but always pursued. You close your eyes again, letting the sound flow through you. The rough straw beneath you, the smoky air, the cold pressing at the walls all fade slightly under the weight of the melody. The lullaby is a thread connecting generations. Your grandmother sang it, your mother sings it, and someday perhaps you will too. The baby sighs once more, then falls into deep, even breathing. Your mother hums a final verse, then falls silent, laying her head back against the wall. The hut returns to its layered quiet, but something has changed. The silence is no longer heavy. It is softened, blessed by song, warmed by the memory of music. You drift again, held by the echoes of a voice that has soothed countless nights. In the middle of a brutal winter, with frost at the door and hunger in your belly, you are carried to sleep not by comfort, not by safety, but by the fragile, enduring strength of a mother's lullaby. The hush returns once your mother's lullaby fades, but now you notice the weight of the blanket pressing down on you. It isn't just fabric, it is history stitched together in scraps. You shift slightly and feel the seams where one piece of cloth meets another, patches layered over years, each square a fragment of some earlier garment or worn-out tunic. One well-established detail from medieval life is that quilts and heavy coverings were often made from whatever material could be salvaged. Peasant families rarely wasted cloth. Every shred of linen, every scrap of wool, even rags too thin for clothing, were sewn together to form coverings. Over decades, these pieced-together quilts grew heavier, thicker, and oddly beautiful, though not in the polished way of noble households. They were living records of survival, each stitch a quiet victory over scarcity. You run your fingers over one square that once belonged to your father's old tunic, the wool rough and faded. Another patch is softer, from a linen shirt your grandmother wore until it thinned too much to keep. Near your feet, you can feel a bit of fur sewn crudely into place, its edges uneven but still warmer than fabric alone. These coverings are more than warmth, they are memory layered in cloth. A curious custom sometimes noted in folk traditions was dyeing patches with natural colors: onion skins for yellow, walnut husks for brown, madder root for red, creating quilts that were not only practical but faintly decorative. You imagine your mother boiling onion skins in the smoky hut, dipping cloth to give it a golden tint, smiling faintly at the brightness it brought to otherwise grey winters. Experts continue to discuss whether these household textiles should be seen purely as utilitarian objects or as expressions of identity and pride. Some argue that peasants valued them only for warmth, while others highlight the careful stitches, the dyed patches, the small attempts at beauty. Holding the blanket close, you suspect both are true. It is functional, yes, but also filled with quiet artistry, the handiwork of women who stitched hope into every seam. The quilt carries weight in more ways than one. It is physically heavy, pressing you down into the straw, but also emotionally heavy, reminding you of generations who endured winters before you. Every patch is a story, every repair a message. We survived this year, and we will survive the next. You feel comfort in that continuity, even as the cold gnaws at the edges. One odd practice villagers sometimes followed was sewing charms into quilts, small pieces of bone, beads, or crosses stitched inside where they could not be seen. These hidden tokens were believed to ward off illness or frostbite, to protect sleepers through long winters. You wonder now if your mother's quilt holds such secrets, if beneath the seams lies a sliver of iron or a saint's medal, quietly guarding you as you drift in and out of dreams. The smell of the quilt is distinct. It is smoky, infused with the hearth's breath, and faintly sour from sweat absorbed over countless nights. Yet there is also the faint scent of herbs, lavender or sage, tucked between folds during summer to deter insects. That fragrance lingers, subtle but comforting, a reminder of warmer days. You pull the covering tighter around you, noticing how your siblings do the same. The weight is shared across bodies, binding everyone together beneath its patched expanse. If one shifts, the others feel it. If one tugs, the others lose their cover. Sleep, like survival, requires cooperation. Scholars note how textiles often became heirlooms, passed from mother to daughter. Even peasants, with little else of value, cherished blankets and quilts as symbols of endurance. You think of how this quilt, heavy and patched as it is, might someday wrap your own children. The thought steadies you, giving the night a thread of continuity stronger than fear or hunger. The embers glow faintly still, their light catching the quilt's seams, casting them in relief. You trace one with your fingertip until your eyes close. The weight of cloth, memory, and care presses you deeper into the straw. It isn't luxury, but it is love in fabric form, and in that love you find warmth. Soon, sleep overtakes you again, heavy and dream-thick, cradled by the patched heritage cloth that has sheltered generations before you and will shelter more to come. You stir in the straw and hear it before you feel it, the wet cough of your father. It rattles through the dark, heavy and raw, followed by the wheeze of his breath. The sound pulls you fully awake, because illness in winter is no small matter. Here, in this cramped hut, where air is smoky and damp, sickness spreads faster than warmth. Contemporary medical records and chronicles often describe how winter brought a wave of ailments. Cold, damp conditions aggravated lungs, smoke-irritated throats, cramped sleeping arrangements spread fevers in days. Even something as small as a cough could spiral into weakness that lingered all season. In an age without antibiotics, recovery was uncertain, and sleep itself often became both remedy and risk. You shift uneasily, pulling the blanket tighter. Your mother stirs too, placing her hand on your father's shoulder, whispering words you can't make out. He nods faintly, curling closer to the fire's faint glow. The hut smells thicker now, not only of smoke and straw, but of sickness, a sharp, sour tang that clings to breath. One peculiar remedy sometimes employed in huts like yours was the use of onions or garlic placed beneath pillows or tied around necks. People believed the pungent scent drew sickness out, absorbing the bad air. You picture a string of garlic dangling above your father, its smell overwhelming but oddly reassuring. In truth, you're not sure it cures anything, but the act of doing something brings comfort. Some researchers argue that smoky huts themselves weakened bodies, filling lungs with soot and aggravating respiratory illness. Others counter that the very same smoke might have killed bacteria and preserved food, indirectly protecting families. The evidence is conflicting, but here in the hut, there is no debate. Your father's cough proves the air is both lifeline and burden. You notice your younger brother turning in his sleep, his forehead glistening slightly even in the dim ember light. Is it just the heat of being buried under bodies, or the first sign of fever? You press your hand gently against his skin, heart fluttering with worry. Your mother does the same, her expression unreadable but her touch lingering longer than yours. Illness shapes dreams too. You remember nights when you shivered uncontrollably, sweat soaking your shift despite the cold air. Fever carried you into visions of endless snowfields, wolves with glowing eyes, fire that crackled but gave no warmth. Waking from such dreams felt like being dragged back from another world. Tonight, you pray your father's cough doesn't carry him into such visions. One curious practice villagers sometimes followed was heating stones in the fire, wrapping them in cloth, and placing them near the sick to ease shivering. You imagine your mother doing this tomorrow if the cough worsens, her hands moving with the quiet urgency of someone who has seen too many winters claim too many lives. Scholars note that medieval people often saw sleep itself as medicine. Physicians wrote that rest balances humors and gives the body time to recover. Yet when huts are crowded and noisy, true rest is rare. You wonder how much recovery can really happen when coughing, snoring, and shifting straw wake you again and again. Still, there is no other cure: sleep, warmth, prayer, and hope. The hush settles again after your father's cough subsides. You lie awake, listening for more, your nerves tense. The baby whimpers briefly, then quiets. Your mother whispers a prayer, her lips moving silently in the ember light. You close your eyes and echo it in your thoughts, hoping that the saints, or perhaps simply the resilience of the body, will carry your family through another night. The cold presses closer, as though testing the hut's defenses. Your father shifts, groaning softly, but then his breathing steadies, deeper now, more rhythmic. You allow yourself a sigh of relief, though unease lingers. In this world, survival is fragile, and every cough is a reminder of how thin the line is between endurance and collapse. You bury yourself deeper under the patched quilt, your nose filled with smoke, your ears alert for the next cough. Sleep does not come easily, but eventually exhaustion claims you. And as you drift, you understand that illness is as much a part of winter nights as frost or hunger, another shadow in the smoky dark, hovering over every breath, every dream, every fragile heartbeat. Your sleep, when it comes, is restless. Hunger hums at the edge of your belly, and smoke curls in your lungs, shaping your dreams into strange and jagged visions. You drift into a half-world where winter and waking life blur together, where every sound and smell transforms into something uncanny. Manuscripts and personal accounts suggest that medieval people often describe dreams in vivid, almost mystical detail. Hunger could twist ordinary visions into nightmares. Smoke could conjure phantoms from the haze. Dreams were not seen as random illusions, but as meaningful signs, messages from God, warnings of spirits, or reflections of one's moral state. You feel that truth now as your dream unfolds. In it, the hut is vast, rafters soaring like the arches of a church, yet still blackened by smoke. The fire glows too bright, its embers pulsing like living eyes. You wander through this space, your feet crunching on straw that whispers your name. The air is thick, heavy with the same smell you breathe each night: smoke, sweat, and the sourness of empty stomachs only magnified into something oppressive, almost alive. One curious belief among villagers was that dreams caused by hunger were prophetic. An empty stomach, they thought, left the soul lighter, freer to wander. If you dreamed of bread, it meant a good harvest was coming. If you dreamed of meat, it promised strength in the year ahead. You smile faintly in your sleep, because even now, scraps of food drift through your vision: loaves steaming with impossible freshness, pots of stew that never empty. You reach for them, but they dissolve into smoke. Experts still discuss how much dreams influenced medieval decision-making. Some argue they guided everything from planting crops to settling disputes, while others insist most peasants saw them as fleeting entertainment, nothing more. But lying here, twitching in your sleep, you sense why they carried such weight. In a world with little certainty, dreams offered direction, even if illusory. Your dream shifts again. Wolves howl outside, their cries stretching into the wind. Only this time, when you turn toward the door, you see not beasts but shadows seeping through the cracks in the walls. They twist like smoke, sliding silently across the floor. You clutch the blanket tighter, even in sleep, your breath quickening. Perhaps it is fever that shapes this vision, or perhaps only the imagination of a hungry child, but in the hut, with its smoky rafters and groaning beams, such dreams feel less like fantasy and more like a continuation of waking fear. One odd tidbit preserved in sermons is that priests sometimes warned against sinful dreams, claiming they revealed the corruption of the soul. Others, more kindly, told villagers to ignore dreams caused by cold or hunger, calling them tricks of the body, not messages from heaven. The contradiction only deepened the mystery. Which dreams mattered, and which were merely discomforts given shape? You roll on the straw, muttering, and your sister nudges you with a sleepy elbow. The touch drags you closer to waking, but not fully. You hover in between, where the embers of the hearth glow too brightly, and your father's cough echoes louder than life. The dream world and the hut overlap, as though the barrier between them is smoke-thin. The pig grunts, startling you awake at last. You blink into the darkness, heart pounding. The fire is dim, the hut unchanged, your family asleep around you. Yet the dream lingers in your chest, heavy as stone. You lie still, staring at the rafters, smoke swirling faintly above, and wonder whether it was only a dream or something more. Sleep eventually drags you under again, but lighter this time, fractured and fleeting. You understand now why medieval people spoke of dreams so often. They were not escape, but another form of endurance, shaped by hunger, by smoke, by the relentless cold. And whether warning, prophecy, or illusion, they carried the weight of the world outside and the fragility of life within these thin wooden walls. The dream haze lingers as you wake again, but this time it isn't fear or hunger that pulls you into awareness, it's curiosity. You find yourself wondering if this broken rhythm of first sleep, wakefulness, and second sleep is the way people have always rested, or if it is simply how winters here demand you live. Surviving documents from the Middle Ages suggest that segmented sleep was common, but there's still no single answer. Some chronicles describe people waking around midnight to pray, tend fires, or even visit neighbors. Medical texts from the period mention the first sleep and second sleep as though they were ordinary parts of daily life. To them, rising for an hour or two in the middle of the night wasn't strange, it was expected. You sit up slightly, looking around the hut. Your father dozes in shallow bursts, always ready to rise if the fire falters. Your mother lies still, one arm across the baby, her breath steady but shallow. Your siblings shift occasionally, muttering half-formed words. The hut is full of this broken rhythm, everyone moving in and out of wakefulness like tides. Some modern researchers argue that this pattern was a natural response to long winter nights. Without artificial light, darkness stretched for 14 hours or more, too long for uninterrupted sleep. The body, they say, adapted by dividing it into two manageable portions. Others believe necessity drove the habit. Fires demanded tending, animals needed checking, and dangers prowled beyond the walls. Both explanations make sense as you sit here in the smoky dark, your body neither fully awake nor fully asleep. One curious reference from a court record describes a villager confessing to mischief during the hours between sleeps. It seems people sometimes used this time for more than prayer or chores, whispered conversations, quiet intimacy, even small gatherings. The thought makes you glance at your parents, wondering if their own whispers sometimes carried more than prayers. There's no firm agreement among historians on how universal this segmented sleep truly was. Did everyone across Europe follow it, or only those in harsher climates where winter nights lasted longer? Some argue it was widespread. Others insist it varied by region and circumstance. The debate continues, but here in your hut, the reality feels undeniable. The night is too long to pass without interruption. You lie back down, folding your arms under your head, and consider how different this rhythm feels from the idea of one long, unbroken slumber. There is a certain intimacy to it. The midnight pause creates a quiet space-time to reflect, to pray, to talk softly, or simply to listen. Perhaps, you think, it makes the night less frightening, breaking it into pieces that can be endured rather than one endless stretch of darkness. One odd folk belief held that dreams after the first sleep were truer, more reliable, because the body was lighter and the soul freer. You recall your grandmother insisting that morning dreams predicted harvests or illnesses, while early night dreams were meaningless noise. The thought lingers as you close your eyes again, wondering whether your smoky visions of bread and wolves mean something after all. The embers glow faintly under their ash blanket, steady and waiting. You sigh, letting your body sink back into the straw. Around you, others stir and settle in turn. It is a rhythm older than you, perhaps older than memory itself, the body waking, then surrendering, then waking again. And so, you drift towards second sleep, your mind carrying the question with you. Is this simply how humans are meant to rest? Or is it only how you must rest here, in a hut of smoke and frost, with winter pressing hard against thin wooden walls? Either way, you surrender, eyes closing, body slipping once more into the cycle that has shaped countless nights before and will shape countless nights to come. The second sleep deepens, but before long you stir again, this time not because of hunger or fear, but because the hut is suddenly louder. More voices, more breathing, more weight on the straw pallet. You blink into the ember glow and realize what's happened. Another family has joined yours for the night. Accounts from village chronicles reveal that in the harshest winters, neighbors often sheltered together. When cold turned deadly, it was safer to huddle in one space than for each household to brave the night separately. Small huts became crowded arks, filled not only with kin but with cousins, neighbors, even travelers who had no other refuge. It was survival through sheer numbers, where warmth was measured in bodies rather than firewood. You shift to make room, press tighter against your siblings as your aunt settles down beside your mother, wrapping her cloak around a coughing child. On the far side, your uncle lays a rough sack on the floor, using it as bedding. Even the animals seem unsettled by the newcomers. The goat bleats softly. The pig grunts in protest before nestling back into straw. One curious note from parish records mentions disputes that arose during these crowded nights. Arguments flared over space on the pallet, over who deserved more blanket, over whose turn it was to stoke the fire. Yet even amid squabbles, families chose closeness over solitude. Better to argue warm than freeze apart. Researchers continue to discuss how frequent this practice of communal sheltering was. Some argue it was only for emergencies, when storms raged or famine pressed. Others suggest it was regular in smaller villages, where kinship bonds were strong and huts small. Whatever the frequency, tonight you feel the truth of it pressing against your shoulder. Survival is a shared effort. The air is thicker now, heavy with the breath of more people. Smoke hangs lower, eyes sting sharper. Someone coughs, someone snores, someone mutters a prayer. The chorus of the hut grows louder, messier, more human. You can feel the heat rising though, undeniable, as though the hut itself exhales more warmly with each body added. One odd tradition recorded in folklore is that when families shared huts, they sometimes exchanged charms or blessings before sleep. An aunt might tuck a sprig of herbs under her host's pillow, or a cousin might whisper a saint's name for protection. These gestures, small as they were, helped ease tensions in crowded spaces, turning necessity into ritual. You wonder if your aunt will do the same before morning, hiding a charm in the quilt's folds. You try to find sleep again, though it is harder now. A cousin's elbow jabs your side, and your sister squirms, grumbling softly. The straw beneath you shifts and rustles as more weight presses into it. Still, as your body adjusts, you notice the warmth spreading. The draft from the door feels weaker, the cold less sharp. In this crowded heap, comfort is scarce, but warmth is abundant. Experts have long debated whether this closeness bred more intimacy or more resentment. Did families emerge stronger from winters spent shoulder to shoulder, or weary of each other's constant presence? Perhaps both. You think of how tomorrow will bring complaints of elbows, of smells, of snoring, but for now, the only thing that matters is that no one is alone. The hut groans again as wind presses against it, but this time you feel steadier. With twice as many people, the night feels less threatening. If wolves lurk outside, they'll find the hut alive with sound. If the frost hag passes by, she'll find the warmth of so many bodies defiant against her chill. You smile faintly, drifting again into drowsiness, your cheek pressed against rough fabric, your ears filled with the noisy, reassuring chaos of survival. And so the hut becomes not just a shelter for your family, but a gathering place for endurance, a reminder that in winter's grip, warmth is not a luxury, but a shared burden, passed from body to body, night after night. You wake again, this time to the faint clink of clay mugs and the low murmur of voices. In the middle of the night, your father has poured a little ale into wooden cups, passing them around to the adults, and even giving the older children a swallow. You sit up, bleary-eyed, and accept the warm drink. It smells sour and earthy but oddly inviting. One established detail from medieval life is how essential ale and mead were to daily survival. Water, often drawn from rivers or shallow wells, could be unsafe to drink, especially in winter when runoff muddied the sources. Ale, weak, fermented, low in alcohol, was safer, more nourishing, and a steady companion to every meal. At night, a sip or two wasn't just habit, it was comfort, warmth in liquid form. You raise the mug to your lips. The ale is tepid, warmed slightly by the hearth, its bitterness softened by the faint sweetness of malt. It burns gently down your throat, settling in your belly like a small ember. You sigh, shoulders loosening, the cold pushed back a little further from within. Around you, others do the same, their faces softening in the dim light. One curious tidbit recorded in household accounts is that even children drank small portions of ale with supper and before bed. It wasn't seen as indulgence or danger, but simply nourishment. Stronger brews mead made from honey, or spiced wines for the wealthy, were beyond the reach of peasants. For families like yours, ale was daily bread in liquid form. There's ongoing discussion among historians about how much this nightly drink shaped medieval sleep. Some argue that ale acted like a sedative, numbing aches and anxieties, allowing peasants to sink into rest despite discomfort. Others suggest its effect was slight, more ritual than remedy. Sitting here now, the warmth in your chest and the soft haze in your head make you lean toward the first explanation. Your aunt chuckles softly after her sip, her cheeks flushed in the ember glow. Your father smiles faintly, the first trace of relief you've seen on his tired face tonight. Even your mother, always careful and sparing, closes her eyes for a moment, savoring the small luxury. It isn't feast, it isn't firewood, but it is something that makes the night easier to endure. The smell of ale fills the hut, mingling with smoke and sweat. It is sharp but familiar, the scent of every supper, every festival, every weary night. You lick the rim of the cup, chasing the last drops, reluctant to let it go. When your father takes the mug back, you already feel heavier, your limbs warm and sluggish. Experts note that alcohol often blurred the line between nourishment and escape. For peasants, it dulled pain and worry. For nobles, it was a stage for excess. Yet in huts like yours, ale was neither luxury nor vice. It was medicine against the cold, a quiet balm for frayed nerves. You lean back down on the straw, eyes already drooping. Your sister giggles faintly beside you, her words slurred as she mutters about warm bread waiting in dreams. Even the baby, too young for ale, seems calmer in the soot-thick air, soothed by the softened voices of the adults. The hut hums with low conversation now, stories traded in whispers. Someone recalls a summer harvest, someone else murmurs about a wedding feast. The memories spill like mead, sweet and bittersweet, filling the hut with something brighter than the glow of embers. Hope. These stories, like the drink, warm from within. Gradually, voices fade again, bodies settling, mugs tucked away. The embers pulse softly, the blanket presses heavy, and ale hums in your blood like a lullaby. Your last thought before sleep takes you is simple, almost grateful. Even in a winter this brutal, there is still something warm to share, still something to drink, still a way to soften the edges of the night. And with that, you slip into second sleep fully, carried by ale, memory, and the promise of dawn. The ale's warmth lingers in your chest, but soon the night presses its weight again. This time, it's not the cold or the creak of timbers that wakes you, but the faint sound of whispered prayers. You blink into the dark and see your mother's lips moving silently, her hands clasped tightly over the baby as though she's shielding him with more than arms. Medieval households leaned heavily on devotion during long winters. Saints, relics, and prayers wove themselves into daily rhythms, but at night their role felt sharper. The darkness was thick with dangers. Wolves, sickness, hunger, frost, and faith became a shield, no thicker than breath, yet strong enough to calm the heart. You listen to her whisper now. The words are familiar, a prayer to Saint Brigid, protector of hearths, asking her to guard the fire and keep frost from creeping inside. Sometimes she prays to Saint Blaise, patron of throats, when coughing grows worse in the hut. Other times it is Saint Joseph, invoked for shelter and safety. The saints are like unseen neighbours, their presence invited into the hut as though another body might add warmth. One curious custom found in rural records is the placing of small relics, bits of cloth said to touch a saint, or crude wooden crosses beneath pillows or beside the hearth. Some families even stitched them into quilts, believing the holy object extended its blessing into every corner of the hut. You remember your grandmother hiding a tiny wooden cross in the rafters, where smoke curled past it each night. "Let the smoke carry prayers upward," she had said, her voice cracked but firm. Scholarly voices remain divided over how much genuine comfort such rituals brought, versus how much they reflected church expectation. Were peasants truly anchored by these nightly prayers, or did they whisper them out of habit, afraid of what might happen if they didn't? You watch your mother's expression in the ember light and know it doesn't matter. Belief itself is a form of warmth, just as real as fur or fire. Your father stirs, adding his own low murmur. His words are less formal, more like a plea. Strength for the woodpile, health for the children, another day of survival. Faith doesn't erase fear, but it shapes it, turns it into something that can be named and spoken. In the naming, it becomes lighter to bear. You shift under the quilt, remembering how prayers sometimes blended with charms and superstitions. Salt sprinkled at the door, herbs tucked under the bedding, words whispered over embers, none of it felt contradictory. Religion and folk belief braided together, forming a rope of hope strong enough to cling to. One odd practice mentioned in chronicles is the bedtime blessing of the animals. Families would cross themselves and then gesture toward their pig, goat, or hens, murmuring a line of protection. Animals, too, were seen as vulnerable to frost and spirits. Watching your mother's eyes dart briefly toward the pig's corner, you realize she carries that habit too, her devotion wrapping around every living thing in the hut. The baby sighs and nuzzles into her chest, quieting as though soothed by her words. Your sister stirs, half asleep, and mimics the gesture of crossing herself without opening her eyes. Even you find your lips moving in silence, repeating words you don't fully understand but know by heart. Experts often note how religion gave medieval people a sense of continuity. Each night's prayer echoed the last, connecting one winter to another, one generation to the next. In a world where survival felt uncertain, devotion stitched life together, a thread that carried people through. The hut seems softer now, calmer. The embers glow steadily, the animals rest quietly, the wind outside fades to a whisper. Whether it is the power of saints or simply the comfort of ritual, you feel steadier too. Fear loosens, replaced by a gentle heaviness in your limbs. You close your eyes, your last thought not of wolves or hunger, but of the fragile, invisible shield woven by whispered prayers. They cannot stop the frost from pressing at the door, but they can wrap the heart in something warmer than cloth. And sometimes, in winters like this, that is enough to carry you back into sleep. The hush of prayers has barely faded when another sound intrudes, the deep groan of the timbers as wind lashes the walls. The hut trembles, its joints creaking like an old ship on stormy seas. You open your eyes again, staring upward as flakes of frost sift down from the rafters, shaken loose by the storm. Contemporary descriptions from travellers often remark on how fragile peasant huts felt during winter storms. Built of rough-hewn logs or wattle and daub, they held back cold and wind only so much. When gales swept across the village, walls flexed, Roofs rattled, and thatch threatened to lift away entirely. Inside, families huddled together, listening to every groan as if waiting for collapse. You feel that anxiety now. The wind howls through the forest outside, hitting the hut with sudden gusts that make the door rattle on its frame. The draft sneaks in instantly, chilling your cheeks. A cousin mutters in his sleep and pulls the quilt tighter, while your father grips his staff, his body tense even as he lies down. Everyone feels it, the storm pressing against your fragile shell of survival. One curious detail in village records is that children were sometimes told to press their hands against the walls during storms, as though their small weight might help hold the hut steady. You remember doing this as a child, palms flat on the rough boards, whispering that you were keeping the house from blowing away. Tonight, you almost feel the urge to try again, though you know it would change nothing. Scholars have long debated just how effective these huts were against extreme weather. Some argue that well-built timber structures, packed with clay and dung, were surprisingly sturdy. Others point to frequent records of roof collapses and wall failures under heavy snow. The truth likely lay in between skill, luck, and constant repair determined whether a family slept safe or not. The sounds inside intensify under the storm's weight. The fire hisses as wind sneaks through cracks, feeding the embers with sudden bursts of air. The roof sighs under the burden of snow sliding down, each thud making sleepers jolt. A chicken flaps wildly before settling again, unsettled by the vibrations. Even the pig lets out a sharp grunt, as though reminding the storm that the hut is full of life and will not be shaken easily. One odd folk practice for nights like this was scattering ashes across the threshold, believed to confuse malevolent spirits carried by the wind. Families sometimes added iron nails or knives stuck into doorframes as talismans against collapse. You glance at the doorway now and see the faint glint of your father's iron blade leaning nearby. Whether charm or tool, it steadies you to know it's there. You lie still, listening, heart thumping with each groan of the walls. The hut is not just wood and straw, it feels alive, breathing and straining like another member of the family. You whisper in your thoughts, almost like a prayer. Hold fast, don't break, stay with us. Experts suggest that storms like these shaped not only sleep but imagination. Tales of spirits riding the wind, of witches flying through night gales, of saints battling demons above the clouds. These grew from nights spent lying awake, listening to roofs tremble and doors shake. In the fragile dark, every sound could become a story. Gradually, though, your body adapts. The storm is loud, yes, but it has rhythm. The howl, the rattle, the groan it repeats, familiar in its violence. Your breathing sinks with it, slower, calmer. You burrow deeper under the quilt, feeling the warmth of cousins and siblings pressing against you. The hut may bend, but it holds. Your eyelids droop, even as the storm continues its assault. You understand why your ancestors filled the long winters with stories of survival. Because in moments like this, the only thing between you and the storm is a fragile hut, a patchwork quilt, and the stubborn will to endure. And somehow, against the odds, you do. The storm eventually quiets, though not completely. The wind no longer rattles the door with force, but you can hear a softer, steadier hiss, snow piling itself against the hut. You stir awake once more, shifting in the straw, and realize with a sinking feeling that the night's battle with the cold has only changed shape. Now it isn't the howl of wind that threatens, but the creeping weight of snow pressing silently against your fragile walls. Accounts from medieval villages make clear how dangerous snow could be, not just as weather, but as a physical burden. When drifts climbed too high, doors were blocked, roofs collapsed, and huts became tombs if families weren't quick to dig their way out. Chroniclers wrote of winters where houses vanished beneath white silence, entire hamlets buried until thaw. You feel the draft grow sharper near the door, and your father rises, muttering. He takes a wooden shovel, leans his weight against the door, and pushes hard. Snow cascades inside in a powdery spill, cold air rushing in behind it. He curses under his breath, then pushes again, clearing enough to keep the door from sealing shut. You watch silently, your breath fogging in the smoky air, realizing that even in sleep's fragile grasp, winter never stops demanding effort. One curious folk method for nights like these was propping a pole against the roof beams from inside, a way of reminding the house to hold its shape under snow. Some even tapped the rafters with sticks before bed, a ritual to warn spirits of collapse. You glance upward now, and wonder if the groan of the roof is only wood under strain, or if something unseen presses down as well. Historians remain divided on whether snow was more often a killer or a savior. Some argue that thick drifts packed against huts acted as insulation, trapping heat like a crude igloo. Others insist the weight was always a hazard. Both views seem possible as you lie here. The hut feels warmer now that snow muffles the walls, but each creak above you makes your stomach tighten. The animals stir restlessly. The goat shifts in its tether, stamping once, ears twitching. The pig grunts low, burrowing deeper into straw. Even the hens ruffle feathers nervously on their perch. Animals sense weight and silence differently than humans. Their unease spreads quickly through the hut, everyone waking bit by bit, a ripple of awareness in the smoky dark. One odd tidbit recorded in village lore is the belief that when animals grew restless during snowstorms, it was a warning that the roof might soon give way. Families sometimes carried goats or chickens outside in the dead of night to lighten the load, a desperate act when snow pressed too heavy. You picture such a scene and shudder, imagining your father pushing animals through waist-deep drifts under a frozen sky. The hut groans again, but holds. Your mother pulls the quilt tighter over you and your siblings, whispering calm words, though her eyes flick toward the ceiling. You understand the performance children must be soothed, even if parents themselves feel the same dread. The quilt is warmer now, bodies pressed closer, snow muting the sound of the wind outside. For a moment, it almost feels peaceful, as though the world has been muffled. Experts note how such nights bred resilience but also shaped folklore. The silence of snow was described as eerie, otherworldly. Some villagers spoke of hearing voices carried in the muffled dark, as though spirits moved freely when the earth was blanketed white. Others said snow itself was a blessing from heaven, a quilt laid over the earth just as families stitched quilts over themselves. Both fear and reverence filled the same frozen air. You press your hand against the wall, feeling the faint cold of snow through the boards. It is both a barrier and a threat. Your eyes close again, mind drifting between the warmth of the quilt and the image of white drifts pressing against the hut. The night continues, heavy but steady. The roof creaks, the animals shift. Your father mutters a prayer while settling back beside your mother. And you, pressed tight between siblings, surrender once more to slumber, trusting the hut, the beams, and the sheer stubbornness of survival to hold the snow at bay until morning light. The snow's pressure eases as dawn inches closer, but you wake once more not from cold, not from fear, but from the discomfort of too many bodies crammed together. The straw mattress beneath you feels smaller every hour, compressed by the weight of kin, neighbors, and animals. Your shoulder aches where your cousin has rolled against it, and your legs are numb from being pinned under your brother's knee. Descriptions from medieval accounts remind us that overcrowding was the rule, not the exception. Privacy was a concept almost unknown to peasant families. Whole households, and sometimes extended kin, shared a single sleeping space. In winter, there was no thought of dignity or personal comfort. The only question was whether the collective body heat outweighed the discomfort of limbs tangled together. You push gently against your cousin's elbow, trying to reclaim a scrap of space, but he only grumbles and tightens his blanket. You sigh, turning instead toward your sister, whose hair tickles your nose. Everywhere you move, you brush against someone else. The hut feels less like a home and more like a crowded ship at sea, everyone packed tight, surviving together in fragile balance. One curious note in folk traditions is that families often developed sleeping hierarchies. Elders claimed the outer edges of the bedding, both to guard against drafts and to shield younger children in the middle. Teenagers were sometimes pushed toward the coldest corners, expected to endure with youthful resilience. Tonight you notice the pattern. Your parents on the edges, younger siblings clustered in the middle, you caught somewhere between duty and comfort. There's debate among social historians about whether this close sleeping fostered intimacy or tension. Some argue that shared warmth bred stronger family bonds. Others suggest that constant lack of privacy led to quarrels and resentment. You can feel both truths in your own body: comfort in your sister's warmth, irritation at your cousin's elbow. The smells of overcrowding are strong tonight. Sweat clings to the quilt, mingling with the sour tang of ale still on your father's breath, the musky odor of animals, and the sharp scent of smoke. The air is so thick you almost feel it pressing down, heavier than the quilt itself. Yet within that heaviness lies reassurance. So many heartbeats, so much breath, proof that life endures. One odd tidbit from parish records mentions that when huts were most crowded, children sometimes played games of guessing who was snoring. They learned to identify relatives by sound, laughing quietly even in the dark. You smile faintly at the thought, hearing your uncle's thunderous rumble from the far side of the hut, and your aunt's higher-pitched whistle. Even discomfort has its amusements. You shift again, pressing your back against the wall for relief, though the boards are cold and rough. Your hand brushes against frost creeping along the inner surface, reminding you how thin the barrier island, but when your sister nestles closer, her breath warm against your cheek, the contrast eases. Experts often highlight how this communal sleeping blurred the boundaries between individual and collective life. Decisions were made together, stories shared together, dreams overheard in the middle of the night. In such closeness, there was little room for secrecy. You think now of how your father mutters prayers aloud, how your mother hums lullabies, how cousins grumble about dreams. Everything is public, even in sleep. Gradually, the discomfort softens as exhaustion returns. Your limbs adjust to the tangle, finding some crooked arrangement where you can breathe. The press of bodies, though irritating, is also steadying. Alone, the cold would devour you. Together, it becomes bearable. Your eyes close, ears filled with the layered sounds of breathing, snoring, and shifting. The hut feels like a single creature now, dozens of lungs moving in uneven rhythm, hearts thudding in scattered unison. You are one part of its body, inseparable from the whole. And with that thought, you let yourself drift back into sleep, lulled not by comfort but by the sheer weight of human closeness, the warmth of many lives crowded into one fragile wooden hut, enduring the brutal winter together. The weight of bodies keeps you warm, but warmth is never steady. You wake again when someone shifts the quilt too far to one side. A rush of cold air slips in through the drafty cracks, stabbing your skin like needles. You pull desperately at the blanket, tugging it back over your shoulders, but in a crowded heap, coverings are always a tug of war. Medieval inventories and household notes remind us how precious blankets and coverings were. For wealthy families, there were woolen cloaks, fur throws, and feather quilts. For peasants, there were patched quilts, coarse woolen mantles, or sometimes nothing more than a cloak worn by day and repurposed at night. The coverings weren't just comfort, they were shields against death in the coldest months. You bury your chin beneath the heavy cloth, trying to find where warmth still lingers. The edges are damp, stained from melted snow, tracked in during the evening. Your cousin tugs at it too, and for a moment you glare in the darkness, though you know he's as desperate as you. One curious folk practice in parts of Europe was placing heated bricks or stones at the foot of the bed, wrapped in rags, to keep toes from freezing. In huts like yours, sometimes embers were placed in clay pots, carefully sealed, then tucked near the bedding. Dangerous, yes, but worth the risk when frost bit deep. You imagine how welcome such warmth would feel now against your numbed feet. Experts argue whether peasants slept under fur more often than records suggest. Fur blankets appear in wills and dowries, but rarely in village accounts. Some scholars believe poor families kept hides primarily for clothing, while others argue that in desperate winters, furs were spread across the bedding heap. You remember once curling beneath a sheepskin. The lanolin smells strong, but the warmth unforgettable. The blanket covering you now is less glamorous. Wool patched with linen, a strip of fur stitched haphazardly at the edge. It scratches your skin and smells of smoke, sweat, and damp earth. Yet you cling to it fiercely. It is imperfect, but it is the only barrier between your body and the icy drafts that slip through the hut's seams. One odd tidbit from rural tradition was the belief that red cloth warded off illness. Families sometimes added a red patch deliberately to quilts, thinking it carried protective power. You glance in the dim ember light and catch a glimpse of one such patch sewn near the edge, a faded crimson square, its colour dulled but still visible. Your mother's doing, no doubt. Whether protection or just necessity, it adds a strange reassurance. The quilt shifts again as someone turns, and once more the cold sneaks in. You groan softly, pulling it back. In this hut, sharing means compromise. No one ever has enough, yet everyone has just barely enough to survive. Blankets are tugged back and forth all night, but no one dares hoard them completely. To do so would doom the others. Scholars suggest this constant negotiation of warmth shaped social bonds as much as survival. Children learned early not to be selfish with coverings. Adults tolerated discomfort for the sake of the group. You sense the truth of that now as you loosen your grip, letting the quilt slide enough to cover your sister. Her small sigh of relief warms you more than the cloth itself. The quilt presses heavily again as everyone settles. Beneath it, the warmth slowly returns, a fragile bubble of shared heat. The air outside still howls, the rafters creak, but within this patchwork covering you feel shielded, if only barely. Your eyelids close once more. The blanket scratches, smells, and shifts constantly, yet it is lifeline, memory, and shield all at once. It may not banish the cold entirely, but it is proof that scraps stitched together can hold back death's chill, and that is enough to carry you into sleep again. You shift again, your body aching in places where straw has thinned to bare earth. No bedding lasts forever. Each night, as families turn and press their weight into it, the straw flattens, dampens, and grows foul. You can feel the cold seeping upward through gaps where the layer has worn thin, the ground beneath unyielding and icy. Archaeological evidence and medieval household notes both confirm that bedding had to be replaced often. Straw pallets were never permanent fixtures, they were seasonal, sometimes renewed every few weeks, sometimes stretched until spring depending on resources. In winter, when snow covered the fields, collecting fresh straw or rushes was difficult. Families endured the smell and discomfort far longer than they wished. You roll slightly and inhale. The scent of the bedding is sharp now. Sweat, smoke, animal musk. Even the faint ammonia of urine where children or animals couldn't always hold through the night. This is the reality no one writes into heroic tales of castles and knights. Survival in huts meant living with stench and filth woven into every straw stalk. One curious tidbit passed down in rural sayings is that clean rushes mean a clean soul. Some families believed that replacing bedding was more than hygiene, it was a spiritual duty. In towns, even churches replaced rushes regularly, scattering herbs like lavender or mint among them. Peasant families did the same when they could, but in winter, mint and lavender were only memories of summer. Scholars remain divided on whether medieval people simply became desensitized to the filth, or if they noticed it as sharply as we would today. Some argue that constant exposure dulled the senses, while others point to sermons and folk rhymes complaining about fleas, lice, and stink as proof that people despised it but endured. Lying here, scratching your arm, you know there is no way to ignore it entirely. Fleas are alive in the straw tonight, biting whenever you shift. You slap absently at your leg, then curl tighter, trying not to disturb the vermin too much. Your sister scratches too, her nails rasping faintly in the dark. The rustling becomes part of the night's soundtrack, as inevitable as snores or the creak of beams. One odd practice villagers sometimes tried was sprinkling ash into bedding, believing it repelled vermin. Others tucked herbs into the straw during harvest, hoping the fragrance would outlast winter. You remember once finding a brittle sprig of rosemary in your palate. Its smell faint but pleasant amid the stink. For a moment, it felt like a promise of summer. Experts note that despite the squalor, bedding remained central to medieval life. Births, deaths, sicknesses, and nightly rest all unfolded on the same pallet. Straw might be foul, but it was also witness absorbing not only odors and vermin but the milestones of existence. It was both despised and indispensable. You close your eyes, trying to focus on the quilt's weight rather than the itch of fleas. The straw rustles as your cousin turns, releasing a puff of dust into the air. It stings your nose, makes you cough softly. But gradually, exhaustion presses heavier than discomfort. The bedding may reek, itch, and collapse beneath you, but it still does its job. It lifts you just enough above the frozen earth, keeping death's chill from creeping fully into your bones. And so, despite everything, the stink, the vermin, the aches, you surrender again to shallow slumber, proving once more that survival rarely looks like comfort, but always like endurance. The itching from fleas and the stench of damp straw fade eventually into the rhythm of breath and warmth, but sleep is shallow. Your mind drifts toward thoughts of the fire, your most fragile lifeline. Even banked under ash, embers can fade before dawn, and without them, the hut would become a tomb of frost by morning. One established detail from medieval life is how carefully fires were tended through the night. Families rarely let the flame die completely, for relighting in winter was difficult and dangerous. Instead, embers were covered with ash to smolder slowly, conserving heat until morning. This banking kept the coals alive, ready to flare again with fresh fuel. You turn your head toward the hearth, squinting at the faint glow. A thin line of red still pulses beneath the grey ash, like the heartbeat of the hut itself. Your father rises again, shoulders stooped, and prods the coals with an iron poker. He adds a small stick, not enough to waste wood, but enough to coax the fire into breathing. The glow brightens faintly, smoke curling upward into the rafters. One curious folk method to guard the fire was covering embers with dried dung mixed with straw. It insulated the coals better than ash alone, ensuring they lived until morning. The smell, acrid and strong, filled huts with a sharper tang, but families tolerated. Its smoke was preferable to freezing. You wrinkle your nose even now, wondering if your father has used such a trick tonight. Scholars still argue about how much of a peasant's day revolved around firekeeping. Some claim it was constant labor, the hearth requiring attention like a living creature. Others argue it was second nature, woven seamlessly into routines. Watching your father now, you see truth in both views. The fire is both a burden and a companion, demanding care, but rewarding it with survival. The animals shift restlessly when sparks leap. The goat stamps once, startled, and the hens murmur on their perch. Even the pig lifts its head, grunting before sinking back into straw. Fire doesn't only warm humans, it calms the entire hut. Without it, beasts would grow as restless as people. One odd tidbit preserved in local lore is that families sometimes spoke to the fire as if it were alive, thanking it aloud for warmth. You remember your grandmother patting the hearth's edge and murmuring, "Stay with us." Perhaps superstition, perhaps affection, but in nights like this, the fire feels as much a member of the family as any child. You watch as your father lowers himself again, satisfied. The embers glow steady now, painting his face in faint red light before he disappears back under the quilt. The hut settles once more, warmed not by roaring flames, but by the quiet endurance of coals. Experts note that hearths were more than heat sources, they were centers of life. Food was cooked there, stories told there, prayers whispered there. Even in sleep, the fire remained the hut's heart, fragile but enduring. Lose it, and the family faced not just discomfort, but death. You sigh, comforted by the glow. The smoke is thick, stinging your eyes, but you are grateful for it. You close your eyes again, letting the knowledge of embers alive and waiting ease your mind. Sleep wraps around you like the quilt, fragile but sufficient. The fire will not burn out tonight. It will hold until dawn, as it has every night before, carried by vigilance, tradition, and stubborn human will. And with that assurance, you sink deeper into slumber, knowing that the hut's faint heartbeat still pulses in the hearth. The ember's glow steadies the hut, but you wake once more, not from cold or noise, but from the sheer press of the night itself. It feels endless, as though dawn will never come. The darkness has thickened, wrapping around you so tightly it feels almost like a second quilt, heavy, suffocating, and eternal. Medieval chronicles often mention how long nights weighed on the mind. In Northern Europe especially, winter darkness stretched for 14 or more hours, and without candles or lamps, peasants lived mostly in shadow. The length of night was as much a challenge as the cold, gnawing at hope and patience. You stare upward, eyes straining for any light beyond the rafters. Only the faintest silver leaks through cracks in the roof, moonlight or starlight softened by snow. The hut itself seems swallowed, a box adrift in an ocean of black. Even the red glow of the embers seems small, fragile, as though it could be snuffed out by a single breath. One curious custom described in monastic writings was counting prayers, or reciting memorized psalms to pass the hours. Without clocks, time was measured in ritual or repetition. Families whispered litanies together, or individuals muttered words alone in the dark. Sometimes, children were told to count breaths or beads of rosaries until sleep returned. You try the same now, counting your breaths 1, 2, 3 as though numbers might shorten the night. There's ongoing debate among scholars about whether peasants feared the long night more than the cold itself. Some argue that darkness carried stronger associations with evil, danger, and despair. Others believe that villagers grew accustomed to it, accepting shadow as part of life. But lying here, staring at endless black, you feel why fear lingered. Darkness is not just absence, it is presence, pressing, suffocating, infinite. The hut groans faintly, and every sound becomes sharper in the dark. A cousin coughs, and it sounds louder than thunder. The goat shifts its hooves, and the noise seems magnified. Even your own heartbeat feels intrusive, thudding in your ears. With no light to soften perception, every detail grows enormous, filling the silence until your mind begins to invent shapes and whispers that aren't truly there. One odd folk belief held that staring too long into darkness allowed spirits to climb into your eyes. Children were told to shut their lids quickly at night, lest they let the dark inside. You close your eyes at the memory, suddenly wary of the rafters' shadows. Yet shutting your eyes brings its own uneasy dreams, half-waking visions, and the echo of wolves still waiting outside. Experts often suggest that winter darkness shaped medieval spirituality and imagination profoundly. In sermons, night was a metaphor for sin, for despair, for trial, but it was also a space of waiting, endurance, and eventual redemption. Just as dawn always followed, faith taught that light would overcome shadow. Whether people believed this literally or simply clung to it for hope, the rhythm of darkness and dawn shaped every night of their lives. You shift in the straw, curling tighter under the quilt. Your sister presses against you, murmuring in her sleep, her warmth reminding you that you are not alone. The darkness may feel eternal, but you are bound to others in it, sharing the weight. Gradually, your breathing slows again. The heaviness of the night remains, but it is softened by the presence of your family, their bodies steady as anchors in the sea of dark. The hut is still afloat, the fire still alive, the dawn, though invisible, still promised. And with that small assurance, you drift again into uneasy dreams, carried by the knowledge that no night lasts forever, even when it feels endless. You wake once more, But this time something feels different. The air still smells of smoke and sweat, the straw still scratches beneath you, and bodies still press close, but faint light filters through the cracks in the roof. It is not strong, not yet sun, but it is there. Dawn has begun to stir. One detail preserved in medieval accounts is how villagers often rose before sunrise, guided by the faintest grey light. Night was long, but work awaited even before the sky brightened. For peasants, dawn was not a luxury of rest, but the call to labour feeding animals, breaking ice for water, preparing the day's meagre meal. Yet, even in exhaustion, dawn carried relief. It meant the hut had endured another night without collapse, wolves, or death. You push yourself up slowly, stretching stiff limbs. Around you, others groan and shift. The baby fusses, sensing change before sight. Your father lifts his head, eyes bleary but determined, already reaching for his boots. The pig snorts, shaking straw from its back. Even the hens stir, feathers rustling in faint anticipation. One curious folk practice was greeting the dawn with a whispered blessing. Families muttered, "Thanks for surviving another night," crossing themselves as light entered the hut. It was not ceremony, it was instinct, born of gratitude that frost and shadow had not claimed them. You whisper your own quiet thanks, lips barely moving, the words as natural as breath. Scholars point out that dawn did not mean comfort, only survival. Hunger would follow, chores would weigh, and cold would still bite. Yet psychologically, that thin line of light mattered immensely. It meant time had moved, winter had not won. The endless night had been endured. The quilt is heavy still on your shoulders, damp with sweat and smoke. You push it aside reluctantly, feeling the rush of cold air replace the warmth of bodies. The shock makes you shiver, but also sharpens your mind. For a moment, you look around at the huddled forms of family and neighbours, their faces weary but alive. Survival, once again, has been achieved. One odd tidbit in village lore is that roosters were believed to chase away evil spirits with their crowing. As if on cue, you hear one outside, muffled by snow but clear enough. The sound cuts through the last remnants of night like a blade. Spirits, frost hags, wolves all banished, at least until darkness falls again. Experts often describe medieval mornings as both bleak and hopeful. Bleak for the labour that began immediately, hopeful for the sheer fact of another day won. You feel that truth now as you rub your eyes, watching your mother stir, her voice low as she hums a morning prayer while shaking crumbs of straw from her hair. The embers glow faintly, ready to be coaxed back into flame. The hut still stands, walls still upright despite the night's storm. The snow outside may be high, but inside, life endures. You take a deep breath, the smoky air filling your lungs, and allow yourself a final moment of stillness before the day begins. Because this is the rhythm of winter life. Nights of fear, cold, and endurance, followed by mornings of survival. Each day carries the same trials, the same hunger, the same fragile fire, but also the same victory, small but profound. You have outlasted the night. And now, as the story softens, let yourself drift with it. The family in the wooden hut has endured another brutal night, wrapped in smoke, straw, and each other's warmth. Their struggles, fleas in the bedding, snow pressing on the roof, wolves howling outside were real, yet so too was their resilience. Night after night, they repeated this ritual of survival, and dawn always came, even when it felt impossibly far away. As you breathe slowly now, picture the embers glowing faintly in the hearth. They are small, but steady, carrying just enough warmth to comfort weary bodies. Imagine the quilt pulled up to your chin, its weight heavy but protective, stitched with scraps of memory and care. Around you, the muffled sound of breath and soft snoring is not distraction but reassurance, proof that life continues in fragile harmony. The cold outside cannot touch you here. The snow may fall endlessly, the wind may shake the walls, but inside this hut there is shelter, warmth, and belonging. Close your eyes and let the crackle of the fire, the rustle of straw, and the rhythm of sleep carry you further into calm. Remember, no night is endless. Darkness always yields to light. Just as peasants centuries ago endured their winters with patience and faith, so too can you let the weight of the night rest easy on your shoulders. You are safe in this story, safe in its rhythm, safe in its hush. So breathe in and breathe out, slowly, steadily, gently. Let your body grow heavier, your thoughts quieter, your heart steadier. Allow the long night to fade behind you and drift, as they did, into peaceful rest. Sweet dreams.